Take a slow breath in and let it out, long and easy, like you finally set down something heavy you forgot you were carrying. Wherever you are right now, whatever the day brought you, you can let it all drift back a little. Just settle into where you're sitting, or lying, or curled up somewhere quiet. Tonight, we're going to walk through one of the richest, most quietly devastating worlds ever put into a video game. We're going to wander the gray, fog-wrapped kingdom of Lordran together, through its crumbling cathedrals and poison-soaked swamps, through its impossible architecture and its long-dead fires. And we're going to follow the hidden threads, the ones most players never even notice, the quiet stories running beneath the surface of Dark Souls, like veins beneath skin. Dark Souls, the 2011 masterpiece from Software and director Hidetaka Miyazaki, does something almost no other game does. It doesn't tell you its story. It leaves it for you to find, scattered in item descriptions and whispered in half-broken dialogue, written in the architecture of a world that used to mean something before everything went wrong. You can play through the whole game and never know who most of these people really were, what they wanted, what they lost, and how their stories ended up weaving into each other in ways that feel almost unbearably human. That's what tonight is about. Not the bosses or the combat, not the punishing difficulty. Tonight is about the people, the knight who chased the sun, the father who went hollow so his daughter would never have to watch him fade, the giant wolf who carried a sword too large for any living creature to lift, standing guard over a grave that will never have a visitor who truly understands what's buried there. These are stories told in fragments and silences, and they're some of the most affecting things I've ever encountered in a game. So, let your eyes go heavy. Let your shoulders drop. Let the words wash over you. And if you drift into sleep somewhere along the way, then wherever you land will be a gentle place. Let's begin. Part 1. The world itself. Lordran and the fading fire. Before any of the characters make sense, you need to feel the world around them. And Lordran is not a place you explain so much as a place you absorb, slowly, the way you absorb the weight of a room that was once full of people, and now isn't. In the age before everything, before any of the stories we're following tonight even had a beginning, there was nothing but the age of gray crags. An ancient world without warmth, without differentiation, without meaning, stone and ash and the silence of things that have always been and never changed. And then fire was discovered, not invented, not created. Discovered, as if it had been waiting all along. And with the fire came a concept that the dragons who ruled the gray world had never needed. Disparity, heat and cold, light and dark, life and death. These contrasts were the conditions for everything that followed, and 4 beings of extraordinary power rose from the world's first fire and claimed the most powerful shards of it for themselves. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, took the greatest of all the Lord's souls. The Witch of Seath took the life soul. Nito, the first of the dead, claimed the death soul, and a small, furtive creature described only as the furtive pygmy claimed the smallest fragment, the dark soul, which he divided and divided and divided until it spread throughout all of humanity. That dark soul, that seed of dark, is the thing that makes humans human. It is also, eventually, the source of nearly every tragedy we're going to talk about tonight. With their power, Gwyn and his allies waged war against the ancient dragons. They scorched them from the skies, peeled away their stone scales, brought them low. The Age of Fire began. Gwyn built his shining city of Anor Londo high on the cliffs, its spires reaching toward the sun like prayers in stone. The Witch of Seath worked miracles of flame. The world, for a time, was something approaching magnificent. But fire fades. That's the central aching truth of Dark Souls. The flames that gave the Age of Gods its power were always going to dim. Gwyn could feel it happening, centuries before anyone else would notice, and his response to that knowledge shaped everything that followed. Every questline we're walking through tonight is, in some way, a consequence of Gwyn's fear of the dark, his fear of the inevitable. Because rather than allow the fire to fade naturally, rather than step aside and let the Age of Dark come as it was always going to, Gwyn took his own soul, the soul of a god, sea god, and fed it to the first flame. He became fuel. He linked the fire, extending the Age of Sunlight by centuries, at the cost of becoming a hollow, burned-out shell of himself, a cinder of a lord, wandering the ruins of his own kiln, attacking anything that came near him out of something that wasn't quite instinct and wasn't quite intention anymore. That sacrifice and the desperate system of lies and illusions built up to keep his legacy intact after he was gone, that is the backdrop against which all of our stories tonight take place. The undead curse, the thing that drives the game's central tension, is itself a consequence of the fading fire. Humans marked with the dark sign cannot die permanently. They resurrect again and again, but each time they do, they lose a little more of themselves. Their memories blur, their sense of purpose erodes. Eventually, the hollowing becomes complete, and what's left is a hollow creature, still walking, still moving, but empty. Driven entirely by whatever last desire or fear was etched so deeply into them that even the disintegration of self couldn't scrub it away. The world of Dark Souls is full of hollows. You pass them in every area of the game. Some are violent, some just sit in corners, rocking, empty, and the tragedy is that every single one of them used to be someone, used to have a name, a reason they came to Lordran, a quest, a hope, a love they were trying to follow. Most of them you will never know, but tonight we're going to follow some of the ones we do. The geography of Lordran matters to these stories too, and it's worth spending a moment with it. Lordran is a kingdom that has been in decline for so long that the decline itself has become a kind of architecture. The great city of Anor Londo, visible from almost everywhere in the game as this shimmering gold peak on the horizon, turns out to be largely empty when you finally reach it. The undead asylum at the top of the world, where the game begins, is a prison for the undead, operated by the gods who decided that the best response to the curse was to lock up everyone it touched. The catacombs run deep beneath the kingdom, where Nido sleeps among the ancient dead. Blighttown sinks below the undead city in an ever deeper descent into poison and rot. Everything in Lordran descends. That's the direction things go. From the high, shining spires of the gods, down through the human city, down through the poison swamps, down through the depths, all the way to the very bottom of the world, where an ancient sea stretches out in absolute silence beneath ash-white trees. And through all of this, through every layer of this descending, rotting, beautifully sad world, people came on quests, some looking for glory, some looking for answers, some just looking for a reason to keep going when every other reason had run out. Let's follow the first of them. The sun rises over Lordran every morning, but nobody is really awake to see it anymore. The undead don't sleep the way the living once did. They rest, sometimes, at their fires. But sleep, real sleep, the kind with dreams and the promise of a natural morning, that's a thing that belongs to a world that still remembers what it felt like to be well. You might be drifting now, and that's exactly where you should be. Let the words keep coming, soft as they are. Let the kingdom of Lordran spread out around you in the dark behind your eyes. The stone bridges, the distant bells, the gray sky that never quite commits to full cloud or full sun. Someone is standing on a rampart in the early morning light. He's looking up. He does this often. Part 2. Solaire of Astora. The man who loved the sun, the first friendly face you will find in Lordran after you escape the undead asylum and find yourself dropped into the wide, broken cobbled streets of the undead burg, is a man in golden armor standing on a bridge rampart, staring up at the sky. He's painted a sun on his chest. Not a real sun, just a bold geometric design, the spokes radiating outward from a yellow center. Center like a child's drawing of the star at the center of a solar system. And when you approach him, when he turns to speak to you, he does it with a warmth that feels genuinely jarring against the desolation of everything around you. His name is Solaire of Astora, and he's looking for something. He tells you so directly, with a cheerfulness that carries just enough earnestness to make it endearing rather than ridiculous. He's looking for his very own son. He says it like that, his very own son. Not the sun, not a metaphor for something, but a personal son. Something that belongs to him. Something that he can carry forward. Something that embodies the warmth and brightness and sense of righteous purpose that he has organized his entire identity around. Solaire is a warrior of sunlight. He became undead on purpose, he tells you, which is already a remarkable thing. Most people struck by the dark sign didn't choose it, but Solaire made a deliberate decision to become undead in order to come to Lordran. He came with a mission, a search, and an iron-backed sense of optimism that the landscape around him does absolutely nothing to validate. He gives you something at that first meeting, before you part ways. The white sign soapstone. It's an item that lets you leave a summoning mark on the ground, allowing other players to bring you into their world as a cooperative phantom. He gives it to you with the kind of generous ease that speaks to what he truly values: the idea of cooperation, of facing difficulty together, of what he calls jolly cooperation, his phrase, used without the slightest irony, in a world where irony would be so much safer. You'll meet Solaire again across the long journey through Lordran. At the base of the Twin Bell Gargoyles, a fearsome paired boss fight at the peak of the undead parish church. His golden summon sign waits for you outside the fog gate. He'll fight beside you with earnest, almost reckless bravery. He takes hits that would stagger a lesser knight and keeps going, keeps swinging, keeps shouting encouragement. When the gargoyles die, when the first bell of awakening rings its deep toll out over the dead kingdom, Solaire is there, alive or close enough, battered and grinning. At the poisonous, damp bottom of the gaping dragon's lair in the depths, his summon sign appears again. In the gleaming, sun-washed approaches to Anor Londo, you can call on him for one of the most famous boss fights in gaming history, the duel with Ornstein and Smove. He'll fight, and often die, and still somehow feel like hope given a sword. But it's in his dialogue, across all these meetings, that the story actually lives. Each time you find him waiting, he's a little more reflective, a little more honest about the complexity behind the cheerfulness. He talks about how he chose to become undead, not as a loss, but as a freedom, a chance to pursue his search without the ordinary pressures of a mortal life. He talks about the warriors of sunlight, his covenant, the tradition of mutual aid and golden cooperation he belongs to, and you sense in it a genuine faith, not in gods exactly, but in the idea that helping each other is the truest expression of what fire means. He tells you that he doesn't know what his son will look like when he finds it, only that he'll know it when he sees it. After your encounters in Anor Londo, Solaire settles at the sunlight altar in the undead parish for a time. He seems changed, still warm, still the man you know. But something in his voice when you speak with him there carries the particular weight of a person who has been searching for a long time and has begun to wonder, very quietly, whether they're searching in the right direction. He doesn't say that. Solaire is not the kind of man who says the quiet parts out loud, but you can hear it in the pauses, in the way he watches the altar, rather than looking at you when he speaks. And then, in the later stages of the game, you follow his trail into the demon ruins and Lost Izalith. This is the deepest wound in Lordran, the place where the Witch of Izalith tried to recreate the first flame from her own soul centuries ago, the attempt that burned everything around her into chaos and flame, killing most of her children and twisting the landscape into a hellscape of burning stone and crawling demons. It is one of the most desolate areas in a game full of desolation. Solaire comes here looking for his son. He comes here because something draws him, some signal, some shimmer of light that his searching heart latched onto. And in the dim volcanic passages between the demon ruins and Lost Izalith, among the chaos bugs that crawl through the tunnels, there is indeed a source of blinding light. A parasite called the Sunlight Maggot, a creature that produces intense golden radiance from its body, and that nestles against skulls like a crown. If you don't intervene, if you don't find the right passage and destroy the red-eyed chaos bug before Solaire reaches it, he will find the Sunlight Maggot and decide, in whatever state of deteriorated hope and desperate longing he has reached by then, that this is it. This is his son. The parasite burrows into his mind. It latches on. And what it does to him is described in the game with the most minimal, precise language imaginable. The Sunlight Maggot within the chaos bugs has burrowed into his mind. It has baited him into forfeiting his soul with the lure of his own personal son. You'll find Solaire near the shortcut door to Lost Izalith, wearing the maggot on his head like a crown. He's still wearing his golden armor. He's still painted with his sun emblem, but he attacks you, without hesitation, without recognition. The maggot has hollowed him, not through the dark sign's slow erosion, but through the precise exploitation of the one vulnerability that was always his need to find what he was looking for. This is the bad ending to Solaire's story, and it's the one most players encounter on a first playthrough because they don't know the path that leads around it. But there is a good ending, and reaching it requires a genuine sacrifice on the player's part. The shortcut path into Lost Izalith is gated behind a covenant called the Chaos Servants, run by the Fair Lady, whose story we'll reach in a later chapter. To reach the rank required to open that shortcut, you need to offer 30 pieces of humanity to her. 30, which represents an enormous investment of one of the game's most precious resources. Most players don't do it on a first run. They don't know why it matters. But if you do, if you open that shortcut and use it to find and kill the red-eyed chaos bug before Solaire does, then you change the ending. The parasite never reaches him. He passes through Lost Izalith intact. Not whole exactly, still searching, still carrying the weight of the long search, but sane, himself. And at the very end of the game, in the kiln of the first flame, in the moment before you face Gwyn, Lord of Cinder himself, in the ruins of the place where a god burned himself alive for his kingdom, Solaire's golden summon sign waits for you. He fights beside you one final time, against a god, against the hollow shell of the greatest king the world of Dark Souls ever had. He's there, steady and shining, the last cooperative presence in a game built on loneliness, because you saved him, and he came back to help you when you needed it most. And when it's over, if he survives, there's no grand ending cutscene for him. The game doesn't show you what happens to Solaire after the fire is linked. That's the nature of Dark Souls. It gives you pieces and asks you to hold them. What we know is that he wanted a son to call his own, something warm and constant and his. And whether he found it or not, whether the son he was looking for was always something metaphysical, a feeling more than a thing, whether the quest itself was the son, we can only imagine. The theory that haunted the Dark Souls community for years after the game's release was that Solaire might be Gwyn's lost firstborn son, the god of war, whose deific status was stripped for reasons the game deliberately leaves unnamed, reduced to mortality and sent wandering with only the memory of what divinity felt like. It was a theory that fit too well to be comfortable. A cast-out god, searching for the sunlight that was his birthright, drawn to Lordran where his father sacrificed himself, unable to recognize that the warmth he was chasing had always been inside him. From Software eventually confirmed that Solaire is not the firstborn. He's a mortal, a man who became undead by choice and came to Lordran on a search that was always going to be hard. But the theory persists because it points at something true about him, even if it's not literally accurate. There is something in Solaire that recognizes divinity, that reaches toward it with both hands open, that is unwilling to let the darkness of the world convince him that warmth and cooperation and joy are naive things. He is, in a world of slow hollowing and institutional deception and cosmic tragedy, simply someone trying to keep the sun alive in himself. That's what he was looking for, and maybe, in the best of all the possible endings, he found it. Take a breath. Let the golden light of his armor fade softly behind your eyes. If you've been enjoying this journey so far, please do consider subscribing. It lets me know that these long, slow dives into the stories beneath the games are worth making. And if you have a character from any of the Dark Souls games whose story you'd love to hear explored at length, leave a comment. I read every one of them, and they shape where we go next. But we're not done, not close. Somewhere in the mid-levels of Lordran, past the poison swamps and the fortress that tests all comers, a man in onion-shaped armor is sleeping in front of a door. He's been there for hours. He'll be there for more hours still. He has nowhere urgent to be, or so he says. His name is Siegmeyer of Catarina, and his story is, in the end, the most quietly devastating one in the game. Part 3, Siegmeyer and Sieglinde of Catarina, a knight's last adventure. There is something immediately, almost irresistibly charming about Siegmeyer of Catarina. His armor is shaped like a giant onion, absurd and bulbous, and when you first find him, he is asleep against a locked gate at the entrance to Sen's fortress, snoring. When he wakes up and speaks to you, his voice is full of a bluff, bumbling good cheer that reads as comedic at first. The bumbling adventurer, out of his depth, waiting for the next challenge to present itself. But Siegmeyer is carrying something heavy, and the further his story goes, the more clearly that weight reveals itself. Sen's fortress is one of the great gatekeepers of Lordran, a structure designed to test undead before they can pass through to Anor Londo. It's full of swinging blades and rolling boulders and snake men with javelins, all arranged as a kind of elaborate lethal examination. And the gate that Siegmeyer has been sleeping in front of is the one that requires both bells of awakening to be rung before it opens. He's been waiting long enough to fall asleep. He'd just arrived at Sen's fortress, he tells you when he wakes, and was puzzling over this gate, and a funny thing happened. It seems he nodded off. He says this with such genuine, untroubled affection for himself, such cheerful self-deprecation, that it's hard not to like him immediately. You ring both bells, the gate opens, and Siegmeyer waddles forward, delighted, telling you that your help has taken a burden from his shoulders, that now he can continue his grand adventure. His grand adventure. He says those words with the conviction of someone who has built an entire identity around them. You meet him again inside Sen's fortress itself, standing at the edge of a room overrun with silver snake men, 7 or 8 of them milling about below him, guarding the path forward. He's been standing at this edge for a while. You can tell by the quality of his contemplation, the particular settled quality of someone who has been looking at a problem so long it has become almost comfortable. He asks if you might just help with this one small obstacle. He's been thinking about it quite a lot, and he believes he has a plan, but it would be tremendously helpful if you might just clear out most of those enemies. Just as a courtesy. You clear them out. Siegmeyer descends, praises you lavishly for your contribution, and awards you a tiny being's ring, explaining that it was given to him by his dear wife and that he wants you to have it. It's a small gesture, a minor ring, but the mention of his wife is the first quiet thread of something that will unravel throughout the rest of his story. In Anor Londo, you find him again in the great hall of the cathedral, looking out at the view with genuine, uncomplicated wonder. The city of the gods, shining and impossible, and Siegmeyer in his onion armor standing in it, grinning like a man who genuinely cannot believe his own luck. He's delighted to be here. He's delighted to be anywhere, or at least that's what he projects. After you collect the Lord Vessel, he appears at Firelink Shrine, the game's central hub. He's reflective here, a little less effusive. He talks about the adventure, about the things he's seen, and the challenges he's overcome, but underneath the buoyancy, there's the faint outline of something tired, something that has been riding hard on cheerfulness for a long time and is beginning to feel the exhaustion of the effort. He tells you he's still looking for danger, something worthy of a good adventure. And then he's gone. You find him next in Blighttown. Blighttown is the most unanimously dreaded area in Dark Souls. It's a descending nightmare of toxins and vertigo, a makeshift city built into the scaffolding of a bottomless pit, populated by bloated, swollen creatures that spew poison and gigantic mosquitoes and plague rats. The air itself seems to want to kill you in Blighttown. Everything about the place is designed to make you feel small, sick, and lost. Siegmeyer is asleep on a small island in the poison swamp at the bottom. He wakes when you approach and asks, with a humility that sits oddly on him, whether you happen to have any purple moss clumps. He's been poisoned. He managed to reach this island, but he can't go any further without treatment. He tells you this without drama, without self-pity, just with the mild, practical puzzlement of a man cataloging the current obstacle. You give him the moss clumps if you have them. He thanks you with warm, genuine relief, and gives you his pierced shield. And then he reflects briefly on how odd it is that the adventure keeps requiring other people's help. He's not complaining, he's just noticing. He disappears again, and the next time you find him is in the poisonous pit of Lost Izalith, having fallen through the floor into a trap. Below him in the pit are 5 Chaos Eaters, enormous, nauseating creatures of pure appetite. He looks down at them with the expression of a man who has confronted many dangers and is trying very hard to be enthusiastic about confronting one more. His plan, such as it is to jump in and fight them. This is the pivot point, the moment where the player's choice determines which version of the story they're telling. If you clear all 5 Chaos Eaters before Siegmeyer jumps in, you spare him the fight entirely. He descends, looks around at the dead creatures, and you can hear the shift in him. It's subtle, but it's there. He thanks you. He says you've taken a burden from his shoulders again. And then he says that perhaps the adventure is over. Perhaps there is nothing left that requires him to throw himself at it. He disappears again after that, and you never see him again. Sieglinde, his daughter, also doesn't appear in her final scene. The story just ends, quietly, with a man who realized that he'd run out of things to contribute and quietly stopped. If you allow Siegmeyer to participate in the Chaos Eater fight, but he falls below half his health during the battle, he dies of his wounds shortly after. Sieglinde never gets to deliver the message she came all this way to deliver. But if you let him fight, and he survives with more than half his health remaining, then the story continues, and it becomes one of the most devastating narrative sequences I've ever seen hidden in the corners of a game. Because here is where Sieglinde enters the picture. Somewhere earlier in the game, at the entrance to the crystal cave in the Duke's archives, there is a golden crystal golem that's slightly out of place. Different from the blue golems around it, heavier, more solid, and when you defeat it, a person falls out. A person in Katarina armor, smaller than Siegmeyer's. A lighter voice. She introduces herself as Sieglinde of Katarina, and she was trapped in the crystal and doesn't entirely know how she got there. She thanks you, and then she asks, with a mix of hope and anxiety, that she's doing her best to keep out of her voice, whether you've seen her father. You wouldn't miss him, she adds, with the faint ghost of a smile, the armor. Sieglinde of Katarina has come to Lordran looking for her father, and she's carrying something for him, her mother's last words. This is the detail that reframes everything about Siegmeyer's story. His wife, the woman who gave him the tiny being's ring, the ring he gave to you, has died. And Siegmeyer doesn't know. He went adventuring, as he always did, and his wife died while he was away. And his daughter has crossed into the most hostile and cursed kingdom in the world, gotten herself trapped in a crystal golem in the process, just to find him and tell him. If you tell Sieglinde that you've seen her father, she makes her way to Firelink Shrine to wait. And after you save Siegmeyer and lost Izalith with his health intact, the final scene plays out at Ash Lake. Ash Lake is at the very bottom of the world. You reach it through the Great Hollow, a massive, nightmarish tree that descends through the floor of Blighttown for what feels like the better part of a day's travel, its branches twisting, and enormous mushroom men clinging to its bark, spiders and curse-spreading frogs inhabiting its hollows. Eventually, if you follow it all the way down, you emerge into Ash Lake. It's one of the most beautiful areas in the game, vast and perfectly still, an inland sea of soft white ash. Ancient trees rise from it in every direction, massive and pale, their roots curving into the white water. The sky is neither day nor night, but something in between, a perpetual gray twilight that hangs over everything like a long exhale. It is, despite being at the absolute bottom of a dying world, the calmest place in Lordran, quieter even than the graveyard where Sif waits. Siegmeyer is there with Sieglinde, but Siegmeyer has gone hollow. He is on his feet, but not himself. The adventure, the thing that held him together, is over. He helped where he could, and then ran out of ways to help, and the undead curse, which waits for every hollow in waiting, moved in to fill the space that purpose left behind. His daughter stands over him, and she is crying, and she is holding a weapon. She killed him. Her father went hollow and attacked her, and she put him down, because that was the only thing left to do, and now she stands over his body at the bottom of the world and cries, and she gives the player a Titanite slab, which is one of the most valuable upgrade materials in the game, and she says almost nothing. The silence she stands in after says everything. There's an interpretation of Siegmeyer's story that some players never quite reach, but which I find the most truthful one. Siegmeyer knew he was hollowing. The undead curse doesn't sneak up on you. You feel it, the fraying, the slow subtraction. He knew it was coming, and what he was trying to do across all those adventures, all those moments of deliberate helplessness where he waited for you to show up and make things possible, was use up everything he had left. He wanted to go out as a knight who needed rescuing, who had adventures, who was part of things. He didn't want to hollow alone somewhere unremarkable. He gave his wife's ring to a stranger so that something of her would keep traveling. He asked for help over and over because asking for help was a way of staying connected to the world that was pulling away from him. And at the very end, at Ash Lake of all places, the bottom of the world, and also the quietest and most beautiful part of it, he hollowed, and his daughter was there. He didn't go hollow alone. That's what he was afraid of, I think. And she was there. That counts. Even in Dark Souls, that counts. Ash Lake stretches out in the quiet behind your thoughts. The white trees, the still water, the gray light that isn't quite dawn and isn't quite dusk. Let it hold you for a moment. Then we'll move on. There is another story that lives in a grave in a dark garden, tended by something enormous and gray, that carries a sword too big for its mouth, and has been standing guard for longer than anyone living remembers. Part 4. Sif, the Great Grey Wolf, the Gravekeeper. In the dark root garden, past the stone doors that require the crest of Artorias to open, past the stone golems and the dusk-gray mushroom patches, there is a graveyard. It's a serene place by the standards of Lordran, quiet, mossy. the kind of graveyard that has had long enough to become beautiful, where the tragedy has had time to weather into something like peace. There are a few grave markers, small ones, crooked with age, and at the center of it, there is one grave that is different from the others. It's larger. It has the unmistakable look of something that mattered more than the others. And guarding it is one of the most striking images in a game full of striking images. A wolf, not normal-sized, enormous, great as the game calls it, in the way that great means something more than big, something closer to monumental. Its gray fur ripples like smoke in the dim air of the garden, and clenched in its jaws, held with the practiced care of something that has been doing this for a very long time, is a greatsword. Not a wolf-sized weapon, a full greatsword, an enormous knight's weapon, the kind you'd need 2 hands to swing even if you were a full-grown human warrior. This creature carries it in its teeth, has been carrying it for as long as anyone has known this place exists. That sword belonged to the knight buried in that grave. The wolf's name is Seath, the knight's name is Artorias, and the story between them is told almost entirely in silence, in the seconds of hesitation before a boss fight begins, and in the way a wolf moves differently when it's hurt, limp-legged and desperate, and what that desperation tells you about why it's fighting at all. Artorias the Abyss Walker was one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, who sacrificed himself to extend the Age of Fire. Of those 4 knights, Artorias was considered the most heroic, the most pure, the one whose legend would outlast all the others. He was a warrior of extraordinary skill, who earned the title of Abyss Walker in the period when the Abyss, a spreading darkness that consumed and corrupted everything it touched, first began to threaten the kingdom of New Londo. The Abyss is the concentrated darkness of the human soul made manifest and uncontrolled. When it takes a person, it hollows them in a different way than the dark sign, reducing them to dark wraiths, creatures of pure appetite and aggression. The 4 kings of New Londo fell to it. Their entire kingdom was sacrificed, flooded to contain the spread. Artorias developed the ability to walk through the abyss without being consumed. He made a covenant with the creatures that lived in it, understanding the dark rather than simply fearing it, and that understanding gave him passage. He earned his title not through conquest, but through a kind of terrible empathy. His companion through all of this was Seath, a wolf who had been with him since Seath was a pup, who had hunted beside him, who carried his ring when he was deep in the darkest places. The bond between a wolf and a warrior is one of the oldest stories there is, and in Dark Souls it carries all the weight that long history suggests. When Artorias traveled to Oolacile, an ancient human kingdom that had been torn open by the Abyss after a primordial being called Manus, the father of the Abyss, was disturbed from his ancient rest. He went because it was what knights like him did. Oolacile was burning. Its people were being consumed. Princess Dusk had been taken. Artorias went. He couldn't do it. What he found in the depths of Oolacile was Manus himself, something so vast and dark and purely human in its ancient rage that even Artorias couldn't withstand it. He was broken. His left arm was shattered. He was losing himself to the abyss, the corruption seeping through the cracks in his armor, in his mind, the very darkness he could walk through beginning to walk through him. He had one thing left to do. He raised his great shield and used it to cast a magical barrier, a protective circle, and he put Seath inside it, his companion, his wolf, the one he'd hunted with, traveled with, carried the ring for him in all the dark places. Artorias protected Seath with the last coherent thing he could do, and then the abyss took him entirely, and he wandered the ruins of Oolacile, completely corrupted, attacking everything. The last shreds of his purpose turned monstrous by the very dark he'd always been willing to walk into. Seath stayed inside the barrier, safe, alone. When the chosen undead, your character, eventually arrives in Oolacile through a time travel sequence triggered by Manus dragging them into the past, one of the first things you can do is find Seath behind that barrier, still young, still small, still guarding it. If you choose to free the wolf, there is a reunion cutscene that plays out in silence. The wolf and the player's character in the ruins of the ancient kingdom, a moment of warmth surrounded by ruin. And Seath, recognizing some quality in this strange undead traveler, helps them. You can summon the wolf for the final fight against Manus. In the present day, in the timeline of the main game, Artorias is long dead. His body is somewhere in the grounds of the old Darkroot Garden, under a grave marker. And Seath is still there, has been there for 200 years, still carrying the sword, still guarding the grave, still circling the boundaries of that graveyard with the steady, unhurried patience of a creature that has organized its entire existence around a single act of protection and simply never stopped. The Covenant of Artorias, a ring that Seath guards and that the player must obtain to access a late-game area, is the object of the confrontation. The player needs the ring. The only way to get it is to take it from Seath, and Seath doesn't want to give it. The boss fight with Seath begins with a cutscene that plays differently depending on whether you freed the young Seath in Oolacile. If you didn't go to Oolacile, if you never played the DLC, if you never had that reunion in the ruins, the fight begins with Seath regarding you with simple threat. A guardian confronted by someone who wants what it's guarding. Dramatic, but straightforward. If you did save Seath in the past, the cutscene is different. Seath pins you. The Great Wolf has you, and it's about to end you, and then something happens. A hesitation, a shift. Seath's body language changes, slowly, in the way that animal body language does when recognition arrives. The wolf remembers. The wolf looks at you with those enormous gray eyes and recognizes the person who was there, 200 years ago, in the wreckage of Oolacile, who reached through Artorias' barrier and set a young wolf free. Seath backs away, slowly, raises its head and howls, then bends down and picks up the greatsword again, carefully, the way you do something you know you have no choice but to do. And the fight begins anyway, because even though Seath knows you, even though there is recognition, and perhaps something that functions as gratitude in whatever passes for the wolf's inner life, even though you save Seath in another time, the wolf's obligation is to the grave, to the one who made the barrier, to the duty that was given through the act of being protected. As the fight continues and Seath takes more damage, the wolf's movements change. It begins to limp. It holds the sword differently, compensating for wounds, moving with the broken gait of something that is hurt, and knows it and keeps fighting anyway. The sword drags sometimes. The leaps are smaller. The howls carry a different quality, not aggression anymore, something closer to grief. Most players who reach this moment stop for a second. Some of them don't want to finish it. The game is asking you to kill something that is fighting you out of loyalty to someone it loved, that is hurt and knows it's losing and won't stop, that has been standing watch over a grave for 2 centuries and is now going to die defending it from someone it recognizes. There is no good resolution here. The ring must be taken. The story must continue, but the game is honest about what it costs. When Seath falls, the soul left behind is described as the soul of the great gray wolf, who guards the grave of Artorias the Abyss Walker. Special beings have special souls. And those who used to carry Seath's rings remember a wolf of formidable resolve, capable of navigating the most perilous realms through sheer will and alliance. The wolf hunted with the night, protected the night's memory when there was nothing else to protect, and died, in the end, still holding the sword. In Dark Souls 3, the 3rd game in the series, there are references to the Abyss Watchers, a warrior legion that formed itself around the legacy of Artorias and Seath, soldiers who took it on themselves to carry forward the duty to fight the dark. Their chapel has an ancient wolf whose blood the warriors use in their rituals. There is a strong tradition among lore scholars that this old wolf of Faron, as it's known, is either Seath descended through time or a lineage descending from that great gray wolf, the memory of the gravekeeper passing forward into a new age. Whether or not that's literally true, the image it suggests is a beautiful one. That the loyalty Seath carried doesn't end when the wolf does, that it passes on, that a wolf who stood at a grave for 200 years planted something in the world that outlasted even the death of the original vigil. The grave in Darkroot Garden is quiet now, empty. But somewhere in the ruins of Old Faron, in the long, damp forests where undead warriors keep their watch, something howls at a sky that can't quite remember whether it was ever bright. Some stories in Lordran are about the fall from great heights, but some of the most moving ones happen far underground, where no one thought to look for them, in places so hostile and dark that no one would choose to be there unless they had no other choice. The next story we're following lives at the very bottom of Blighttown, in a hidden chamber below a bell tower, in the dark. 2 sisters, changed forever by their mother's catastrophic experiment with fire. One of them hunts, one of them waits. Let both of them carry you a little deeper into the dark. Part 5. Quellaog and the Fair Lady. Sisters at the Edge of the World. Before we meet the sisters themselves, we need to understand what happened to their family. The Witch of Izalith was one of the great lords who rose from the first flame at the beginning of the Age of Fire. She commanded the power of flame, and she was not a passive custodian of it. She was a shaper, an experimenter, someone who believed that fire was a thing to be understood and directed, not simply revered. When the first flame began to fade, centuries after the Age of Fire began, Gwyn's response was to prepare to sacrifice himself to it. The Witch of Izalith had a different idea. She believed she could recreate the flame. She believed that if she understood her own powers deeply enough, she could conjure a new first flame from her own soul, and the chaos flame it contained, extending the Age of Fire from within rather than feeding herself to it from without. She was wrong. The chaos flame she created didn't reproduce the first flame. It exploded outward in an uncontrolled conflagration that consumed the city of Izalith, transformed the land into a burning hellscape of twisted stone and chaos demons, and took most of the witch's daughters with it. Some became the demons we fight throughout the game. The witch herself was absorbed into the bed of chaos, the impossible tangle of flame and life and corruption that sits at the center of Lost Izalith. A boss the game asks you to fight, but that is genuinely more sad than threatening. A mother turned into a nightmare by her own ambition. 2 of the daughters survived in a form that allowed them to remain conscious and independent. Quelag and her younger sister, who the game never names, and whose name in the community has been variously suggested but never officially confirmed, though many call her the Fair Lady. Their escape from the chaos that consumed Izalith cost them a physical price. Their lower bodies were transformed into the abdomens of enormous spiders, their human upper bodies rising from the arachnid masses below. They settled in a domain at the edge of Blighttown, in the tunnels below the swamp, in a space that the game calls Quelag's domain. It is a peculiarly intimate place for the infernal geography around it. The ceiling hangs low, the walls press close. It has the feeling of a home made in a hostile place by beings who had no other options. The Fair Lady is the firekeeper of the bonfire in the hidden chamber behind the domain. She was made a firekeeper to sustain her life, because firekeepers are bound to their bonfires and derive strength from them. But her condition is dire. The people of Blighttown, the wretched inhabitants of that descending nightmare of scaffolding and poison, developed a specific affliction called blight. Their bodies began filling with pus, with a toxic internal pressure that their flesh couldn't contain and couldn't expel. It was agonizing. There was no cure. And the Fair Lady, the younger sister, the gentler one, could not watch them suffer. She absorbed the blight pus into herself. She took the poison from the bodies of Blighttown's inhabitants into her own body, curing them and making herself sick, over and over, until she was perpetually near death from the accumulated toxin. She is blind now, weakened to the point where she can barely move. The eggs she produces, the ones that should have new life in them, are dead before they're formed, her body too compromised to sustain them. She speaks to you in the hidden chamber, in a voice that is gentle and confused and dim with suffering. She speaks to you as if you were her sister, because you're the only one who ever visits her, and she's blind, and she's drifted a long way from anything like ordinary consciousness. She thinks you might be Quelag. She calls you that, hesitantly, or just says sister, and asks if you've brought more humanity. Because Quelag has been bringing her humanity. The thing that sustains a firekeeper. The thing that holds the bonfire alive and holds the Fair Lady alive with it. Quelag has been hunting in Blighttown, killing undead travelers who come through the swamp, taking their humanity, bringing it back to her sister. Every hollow or undead that Quelag killed in Blighttown, she killed for her sister's survival. The Chaos Servant Covenant, which the player can join by speaking with the Fair Lady, is built around this same principle, offering humanity to her, 30 pieces of it to open the shortcut to Lost Izalith, which is also the act that saves Solaire. There is a specific undead named Aingi who serves the Fair Lady, attending to her, muttering about how she was treated for her sacrifice, a gentle, slightly bewildered being who simply could not leave someone that suffering alone. When you fight Quelag as a boss, she attacks you with ferocity. She doesn't ask questions, she doesn't try to negotiate. She's protecting the way to her sister's chamber, and she's good at this. She is a chaos witch transformed by the same flame that took so much from her family, wielding that transformation with precision and skill. The giant spider body she moves on can explode with lava. Her sword is made from the chaos blade of the same cataclysm that destroyed her home. She attacks you because you are between her and her sister, and there is nothing in the world that Quelaag will allow to be between her and her sister. When you enter the hidden chamber after defeating Quelaag, the fair lady is there, sitting by her bonfire, speaking to you in her gentle, confused voice, calling you sister, asking if you brought more humanity, not knowing that her sister is dead, not knowing that the person she's addressing is the one who killed Quelaag in the tunnel outside. And the game gives you the option to offer her humanity, to take on, voluntarily, the role her dead sister played, to bring her the sustaining thing she needs while she sits in the dark and calls you by the wrong name. If you wear the old witch's ring when you speak with her, an item found in the game that lets you understand the language of flame, the fair lady's voice shifts. She's still confused, she's still sick. But there's something more present in what she says, something that understands more than she usually lets on. And the things she says when you truly hear her are among the most quietly affecting pieces of dialogue in the game. She speaks about her sister, about Quelaag's protectiveness, which she appreciated but also sometimes found exhausting, about the people of Blighttown, whose pain she couldn't watch and couldn't not absorb, about how she knew what she was doing to herself when she absorbed the blight, that she wasn't unaware of the cost. She just weighed the cost and decided. She decided. That's the thing about the fair lady. In a game full of people who fell into their tragic conditions, who were consumed against their will, who were corrupted by ambition or circumstance, the fair lady looked at suffering she could absorb and chose to absorb it, not because she didn't know what it would do to her, because she did. The two sisters gave everything they had for the world around them and for each other. Quelaag gave her life protecting her sister and hunting for the humanity that kept her alive. The fair lady gave her health, her sight, her vitality, to ease the suffering of people who had no claim on her at all, who had nothing to offer her, who were just suffering in the dark below where she lived. There is a third sister, Quelana, the eldest surviving daughter of the Witch of Izalith, who appears under a specific condition in Blighttown as the only surviving teacher of pyromancy. She spent centuries invisible, hiding from the chaos that destroyed her family, unable to face what the flame became. She asks you, if you find her, to destroy the bed of chaos, to end her mother's torment. When you do, Quelana disappears. Whether she dies or simply moves on to wherever things go when they're finally released from their vigil, the game doesn't say. She was the one who survived by fleeing, who has spent the longest time carrying the guilt of having escaped when everyone else was taken. Her grief for her mother and sisters is so old it has become structural, built into the way she moves through the world. 3 sisters, 3 different ways of carrying the same loss. One who fought for what remained. One who gave herself over completely to the suffering she couldn't ignore. One who survived by making herself invisible and spent centuries paying for it. Their story is the Chaos Flame's truest legacy. Not the demons, not the burning ruins, but these 3 women finding completely different ways to exist after the fire took everything they were supposed to have. We're going to rise now, up from the depths of Blighttown, through the ascending levels of Lordran, all the way to the top, to the golden city above the clouds, to Anor Londo, which is not what it appears to be. Part 6, Gwyndolin and the Illusions of Anor Londo. The god who stayed in Anor Londo is the destination every early game player is trying to reach. It sits on the horizon like a promise, its golden spires catching light that doesn't seem to have a source, its impossible proportions suggesting a civilization that built for gods because it was built by them. Getting there is an exercise in determination, through Sen's fortress, through the catacombs or the depths, past the silver knights and the winged demons that guard the city's approaches. And when you finally arrive, when you cross the bridge and pass through the gate, when you see the cathedral and the long, sun-washed promenade leading to it, there's a genuine lift, a sense that the effort meant something. Anor Londo is beautiful, stately, full of a warm light and soaring architecture. Even the enemies here seem different in quality. The silver knights with their tall shields and elegant polearms, the stone gargoyles watching from the cornices, all of it suggesting that you have arrived somewhere that once mattered a great deal to the people who built it. The boss fight at the center of Anor Londo, in the cathedral where Dragonslayer Ornstein and Executioner Smove wait for you, is famous as one of the most demanding battles in the game. 2 boss-tier enemies simultaneously, one fast and electric, One massive and crushing, neither of them made easier by the other's presence. It's the game's ultimate test of whether you've understood its systems. But what comes after is what we're interested in tonight. Past Ornstein and Smo, past the dark staircase and through the sun-gilded corridor, you enter a chamber and encounter a woman of extraordinary presence. She is enormous, as the gods of Anor Londo are described, her scale suggesting something more than human, and she's dressed in warm gold, and she radiates a palpable sense of benevolence. Her name is Guinevere, Princess of Sunlight, eldest daughter of Gwyn the Lord of Sunlight. She gives you the Lord Vessel, the artifact that lets you warp between bonfires and that marks the transition into the late game. She welcomes you. She speaks with warm approval. She is exactly the gracious, divine presence you needed to encounter after the trial of the double boss fight, and she is completely, entirely an illusion. Every player figures this out eventually. Some do it by accident, attacking Guinevere by mistake, and watching her dissolve in a single hit, her enormous form evaporating like morning frost. Some do it by reading item descriptions carefully and noticing the inconsistencies. When Guinevere dies, or is dispelled, the warm sunlight that bathes Anor Londo vanishes instantly, replaced by a cold, moonlit darkness. The city you walked into was the lie. The dark city underneath it is the truth. The architect of the illusion is Gwyndolin, the youngest child of Lord Gwyn, the only deity who remained in Anor Londo after the gods departed. Gwyndolin is a complex figure in a game full of complex figures. He was born biologically male, but was raised as a daughter because his association with the powers of the moon and forbidden sorcery led Gwyn, in the age's rigid divine taxonomy, to categorize him as feminine. He was raised as the daughter he presents as, and his younger siblings, the few who acknowledge him, call him brother while respecting his presentation. The real Guinevere, the actual eldest daughter of Gwyn, left Anor Londo long ago with her husband Flan, the god of flame. The gods, one by one, abandoned the city as Gwyn's sacrifice reduced him to a hollow husk, and the fire he'd fed himself to began to flicker. The Silver Knights who remained did so out of loyalty to a legacy that had become architectural, built into the city itself. Gwyndolin stayed because someone had to. Because the system that Gwyn sacrificed himself for still needed maintaining, and the only one left was the youngest child, the one raised differently, the one who understood illusions and moonlight, and the way that deception can be a form of care. He created the illusory Guinevere. He maintained the false sunlight over Anor Londo. He built the Covenant of the Blade of the Dark Moon, a group of hunters who invade the worlds of players who have committed sins against the gods, creating a system of divine justice operating entirely through the avatar of a god who isn't there, and the maintenance of a city that, underneath its golden surface, is cold and dark and nearly empty. There is a passage below the cathedral, found by taking the rotating staircase down to a moonlit corridor lined with statues of Gwyn, that leads to the Dark Moon tomb. In a chamber that holds Gwyndolin's boss fight, if you break the deception by attacking Guinevere, or if you simply choose to confront him, you will find a figure in shining blue robes with snakes emerging from the hem in place of legs, wielding the powers of moonlight and illusion, with the desperate, furious precision of someone who has been maintaining a lie for too long and cannot afford to let it break. He attacks because his purpose demands it, because the deception is the thing that holds the possibility of the Age of Fire together, and you have violated it. And without it, without the illusion that the gods are still present, without the maintained performance of divine oversight in an abandoned city, the whole careful structure he has held in place by himself collapses. Gwyndolin's tragedy is one of the most specific and human ones in Dark Souls. He was the misfit, the one whose nature didn't fit the categories, the one who was given a different role and a different identity because of what he could do rather than what he was. And then, when everyone else chose to leave, he stayed. Not because he was ordered to, not because he had nowhere to go. He stayed because the city needed someone to believe in the lie hard enough to keep performing it. He is, in his own isolated and desperate way, the most faithful of Gwyn's children, the one who would not let his father's sacrifice be meaningless, the one who maintained the warmth and the light and the presence of divinity in a city that had been empty of actual gods for what might have been centuries. When Gwyndolin dies in Dark Souls 3, the third game in the series, he dies having been consumed from the inside by Aldrich, a lord of cinder who devoured gods for their poor. He's barely conscious when you find what's left of him. The last coherent thing he expresses is that he was here, that someone was here, that the city didn't just go empty and stay that way. The illusion he maintained outlasted him. Players who never found the hidden passage, who never attacked Guinevere, who never looked too closely, experienced Anor Londo as it was meant to be experienced, warm and sunlit and full of divine grace. They carried that warmth through the rest of the game. They believed because Gwendolyn made them believe, and whether the belief was built on a lie or not, it sustained them through the hardest parts of the journey. Is that meaningful? The warmth you felt in a place that was actually cold and dark, the sense of divine approval you received from a presence that wasn't there, the comfort of believing the gods were still watching, given to you by the only one who remained, who would not leave his father's city to become simply a ruin. Dark Souls doesn't tell you what to think about Gwendolyn. It gives you the deception and the truth, and the person in the middle of both, and lets you decide. The moon is a different light from the sun, cooler, more honest about what's missing. Let it settle over you now as we move to a different kind of story, a smaller one in some ways, a story about a man with no divine connection, no heroic purpose, no redemption arc in the traditional sense. A man who throws people into pits, sells them things they need, apologizes with too much relish, and keeps appearing in every single game in the series across completely different worlds. A man who should not, by any reasonable measure, be endearing, and yet somehow manages to be. Part 7. Patches the Hyena, a scoundrel's long road. There is a quality to Patches that is almost impossible to explain and entirely impossible to dislike. He is, by any objective measure, terrible. He tricks people. He lures them to their deaths. He steals. He manipulates. He apologizes with the greasy ease of someone who has been apologizing for things his entire life, and has gotten very good at it without getting the slightest bit more sorry. And yet in a game full of entities trying to claw their way to divinity, trying to survive the collapse of civilization, trying to preserve cosmic lies or hold dead gods' legacies together, Patches is just trying to live, and his consistency across every game in the series, appearing in different forms, different names, different faces, but recognizably, unmistakably himself, has made him something close to beloved. In Dark Souls, he is known as Trusty Patches. The adjective is doing a great deal of work. You first encounter him in the catacombs, standing beside the lever of a spike-trapped bridge. He's pleasant. He engages you in friendly conversation. He notes, with what sounds like honest observation, that you have something of the look of a cleric about you, which, depending on your character build, may or may not be true. If you cross the bridge, he flips the lever. The bridge collapses. You fall. This is Patches' classic maneuver, and he's been doing it across his entire career in these games. The trap, the betrayal, the cheerful, slightly embarrassed apology afterward. It's practically a signature. The second trap, if you're unfortunate enough to wander into it, comes when Patches encounters you near the edge of a pit in the Tomb of the Giants, the darkest area of the game, where the only navigation aid is a lump of light or torches held in your offhand, where every step feels like a risk. He lures you to the edge with friendly conversation, and then, without particular malice, kicks you in. The pit, in this case, is full of hollowed clerics. Patches has an intense, long-standing antipathy toward clerics specifically, priests and holy figures of any stripe. The specificity of the grudge is part of what makes him interesting as a character. He's not a nihilist. He doesn't hate everyone equally. He has a focused resentment of religious authority that speaks to something that happened to him, something the game never quite explains, but that you can sense in the way he spits the word cleric. If you survive the pit, if you find your way out of the tomb and confront him, Patches apologizes, at length, with a quality of apologizing that is simultaneously sincere and completely self-serving, acknowledging what he did while making clear that he's mainly apologizing because it was strategically unsound and because you are still alive and might be dangerous to him now. He becomes a merchant afterward, settles at Firelink Shrine in a corner and sells you things. Not bad things, actually. He has some genuinely useful inventory, and he prices it fairly, and the hostility between you, if you're willing to set it aside, dissolves into a workable commerce. He calls you friend in a way that somehow doesn't quite feel like a lie, even though everything about it should. What makes Patches endure across the series, appearing in different forms in every Souls and Souls adjacent game? From Software has made since is that he represents something genuinely important about the human capacity for survival. He didn't get a Lord's soul. He doesn't have divine bloodlines or legendary weapons or cosmic significance. He has his wits, his willingness to do the morally compromised thing, and an apparently inexhaustible capacity to talk his way through the aftermath. In a world of people hollowing from the weight of purpose lost, Patches never had much purpose to lose. He was always just trying to make it through the next day. And that baseline, unpretentious, sometimes deplorable pragmatism turns out to be one of the most durable things a person can have in a dying world. In Dark Souls 3, his name is Unbreakable Patches, and the adjective is, again, doing enormous work. He disguises himself as Siegward of Katarina, the same onion-armored knight type as Siegmeyer, in order to trap the player and steal Siegward's armor. When you confront him after escaping the trap he set, he apologizes with his characteristic combination of genuine sheepishness and complete self-justification. But then he goes and saves Greyrod, another NPC, a thief on an increasingly dangerous series of scavenging missions, who gets into trouble in Irythil of the Boreal Valley and is likely to die there if no one intervenes. Patches, when you tell him where Greyrod went, goes to save him, without making it a big moment, without demanding recognition or reward. He just goes, because apparently even Patches has people he doesn't want to die. That's the thing about him. He's not good, in the simple sense. But he's not empty either. He has edges that catch the light sometimes. And in Elden Ring, the most recent game in From Software's lineage, he appears again as the untethered Patches, wearing a different face in a different world, still setting the same traps, still apologizing with the same practiced sincerity, still calling you friend with the same ambiguous warmth. There is a moment in Elden Ring where, if you've been watching him carefully, you see something in Patches that looks almost like genuine remorse. Almost like a person who has been running the same playbook for so long that they've begun to wonder, in quieter moments, what it would be like to just be honest. He never gets there. He's not built for it. But the wondering is there. The theory that Patches is transdimensional, appearing in every version of the world, because he's simply the kind of person who exists in all of them, is one of the community's more charming pieces of lore speculation. The hyena in Demon's Souls, the spider in Bloodborne, the trusty and unbreakable versions in Dark Souls, the untethered in Elden Ring. Different worlds, different bodies, the same essential Patches, somehow navigating the apocalypse of each setting, with nothing but guile and a spear, and the unbreakable conviction that there's always a way to make things work out, at least for him. He is, in his own way, the most consistently alive character in From Software's catalog. Everyone else arcs, transforms, falls, rises, hollows, ascends. Patches just keeps going, setting his traps and apologizing for them, finding something to sell and someone to sell it to, surviving. There's a lesson in that, maybe, not a flattering one, but a real one. Patches disappears into the shadow of a corner of Firelink's shrine, settling into his usual crouch, already scanning for the next opportunity. Let him fade back. There are other stories waiting, and the next one isn't about survival so much as it's about the price of knowing too much. About what happens to brilliant people when the knowledge they chase turns out to be the thing that destroys them. About the particular tragedy of scholars who can see further than anyone else and can't look away from what they see. Part 8. Laurentius, Logan, and the Cost of Knowledge. Dark Souls is full of scholars. The world it describes was, before the current crisis, a kingdom of gods and heroes and ancient institutions, and many of the people who came to Lordran in the years since the fires began to fade were the curious, the learned, the ones who believed that understanding the nature of the curse might be the path through it. Most of them ended badly. The story of Laurentius of the Great Swamp is one that most players miss entirely on a first playthrough because it requires a specific, unintuitive choice at a specific moment, and if you make the wrong choice without knowing it matters, the story ends before you realize it began. You first encounter Laurentius in a barrel in the depths. Yes, a barrel. He has somehow been stuffed into a barrel in an area full of enormous undead butchers and plague-spreading rats, and he calls out to you when you approach. He asks, with remarkable composure given the circumstances, whether you might happen to be a person. He's been inside the barrel for some time and has been hoping. you break the barrel. He thanks you, introduces himself as a pyromancer from the Great Swamp, a region known for its practical fire magic, and tells you that he can teach you pyromancy if you meet him at Firelink Shrine. He does. He's one of the earliest and most accessible pyromancy teachers in the game. He's genuinely helpful, relatively cheerful, glad to be alive, glad to be useful. He has the particular contentment of a craftsman who enjoys his work. The problem comes if you show him a Chaos Pyromancy flame. Chaos Pyromancy is the evolved form of pyromancy, born from the same chaos flame that destroyed Izalith. It's more powerful than standard pyromancy, but it comes from a darker, stranger place. From the fusion of fire and the life force of the chaos demons. From the remnants of the Witch of Izalith's catastrophic experiment. If you show Laurentius a chaos flame, something changes in him. He recognizes what it is. He understands what it represents. The deeper power, the further edge, the more complete form of the art he has dedicated his life to. And the look in his eyes when he sees it is the look of someone who has glimpsed something they cannot unsee. He asks you where you found it, and here is the choice. The unintuitive one, the one most players make wrong. If you tell him, you send him there, to the swamp, to Blight Town, where the chaos flame is found, where the poison in the fog and the creatures make it one of the most hostile areas in the game. He's a pyromancer, not a warrior. He's not built for Blight Town. He goes anyway. You'll find him there eventually, if you return to the area. He's in the swamp, wandering, and when you find him, he's changed. Not physically, not yet, but in his manner, in the way he speaks to you. There's an urgency that wasn't there before, a kind of desperate focus. He asks if you found more of it, the chaos flame, whether there's more of it to be found, where it leads, what it could become. He has gone to look for something, and the looking has gotten into him in a way that the original craft never did. If you come back later, after more time has passed in the game's progression, you find him hollowed, wandering the swamp, attacking anything that comes near. The thing he was chasing having consumed the thing he was. He hollowed over knowledge. Not because the knowledge was unattainable, but because it was attainable, and touching it changed what he needed to feel complete, and the chain of that need was longer than he had anything left to follow it with. Big Hat Logan is a different kind of scholar, in a different kind of trouble, heading toward a different but equally inevitable ending. Logan is one of the greatest sorcerers in Lordran. You first encounter him trapped in a cage in Sen's fortress, and freeing him costs a significant number of souls, which is the game's currency, but the investment is worth it. Logan is brilliant. He teaches you spells that are among the most powerful in the game. His giant hat is enormous and slightly absurd. The hat of a man who decided at some point that headwear was a statement of commitment and fully committed. He has come to Lordran because of Seath the Scaleless. Seath is one of the game's most complex figures, a dragon who betrayed the other ancient dragons to side with Gwyn in the war that ended the Age of Grey Crags. In exchange, he was given a dukedom and, more importantly, access to the archives of Anor Londo, where he spent centuries conducting experiments in his crystal caves, trying to discover the secret of true immortality. His experiments created the crystal golems and the channelers and the crystal lizards. They also, in a piece of lore that has implications throughout the series, created the first undead curse, the dark sign itself, as an unintended side effect of his research into the nature of souls and life. Seath is mad. He has always been mad, in the way that someone consumed by a single obsession for centuries becomes mad. But the nature of that madness, the specific quality of his brilliance, is the thing that draws Logan to Lordran. Logan wants Seath's knowledge. He wants the crystalline sorceries, the most advanced magic in the world, the art of taking light and soul stuff and compressing it into something impossible. He works his way toward the Duke's archives, Seath's domain, and begins studying there. He tells you about his progress with the contained delight of a scholar who knows he's on the edge of something important. And then, the next time you find him in the archives, he's in a cage. Seath has imprisoned him. The Duke, the mad ancient dragon who can kill you with a look, and who has been conducting experimental work on human beings for centuries, has locked the visiting scholar in a cage. You free him. He thanks you. He goes back to studying. The third time you find Logan, he's in the Crystal Cave, Seath's innermost sanctum, and he is naked. Not dramatically naked. Just without his robe, without his hat, studying, completely absorbed in the work, in the crystal formations and the sorceries laid out in front of him. And when you speak to him, he barely hears you. He's speaking to himself. He's in the middle of something he cannot step back from. He has, in the language the game uses with some precision, gone mad. The same way Seath is mad. The same madness passed like a torch. He has touched the thing he came for, and it has touched him back in a way he did not account for. The fourth time you find Logan is in the Crystal Cave, and he attacks you. Not because he's hostile in the normal sense, because you're in the way, because you're between him and the furthest reach of what he's pursuing, and he has given everything else up, and there's nothing left in him that registers you as a thing to be preserved. His Crystal Soul Spear is one of the most powerful single spells in the game. He hits hard. He is, in his final form, a terrifying opponent. When you kill him, the knowledge he accumulated is accessible. The spells are real. The research was genuine. Logan was right that there was something extraordinary in Seath's work, something that could be reached and understood and mastered. The question the game asks you to sit with is whether understanding something completely is worth what it costs to get there. Both Laurentius and Logan found what they were looking for. Neither of them was able to carry it back. There's a line between curiosity and compulsion that's easy to cross without noticing you've crossed it. Dark Souls draws it very carefully and then shows you what happens on both sides of it. The archives are quiet now. The crystal formations catch the faint light and hold it, and if you stand in the right place and look up, the ceiling of the crystal cave looks like stars. Something beautiful made from something terrible, left behind by someone who burned up finding it. Let that image rest a moment. There's one more pair of stories I want to walk you through tonight, before we reach the end of this long, soft journey. One about a place where the world turns its back on the unwanted, and one about the knight who stood guard over the memory of a tragedy until he was the tragedy. First, the Painted World, Part 9, Priscilla and the Painted World of Ariamis. The Banished and the Beautiful. The Painted World of Ariamis is not on the main road through Lordran. To get there, you need a specific item, a peculiar doll that can be found in the Undead Asylum during a return visit, in a hidden corner that most players walk past. If you have the doll, and you walk into the enormous painting in Anor Londo, in the hall where the painting guardians watch over canvases nobody looks at closely anymore, the world takes you in. The Painted World is another world inside the world. It is snow-covered and still, a sprawling ruin on a mountain of white, the gray stone buildings and broken colonnades and winding staircases leading nowhere in particular. The enemies here are different from anywhere else in Lordran. There are hollowed creatures with the appearance of monks or scholars, crow demons that walk upright and have the posture of something that was once something else, wheel skeletons, giant poisonous rats, all of them carrying the quality of things that were somewhere else before they ended up here. The Painted World is where Gwyn put things he didn't know what to do with, things that didn't fit the taxonomy of his golden age, beings whose existence complicated the categories. The peculiar and the aberrant, and the ones who, through no fault of their own, made the gods uncomfortable. At the center of the world, in a tower that requires patience and exploration to reach, is Priscilla. She is enormous, by the standard of the bosses you've fought, though not in the overwhelming way of giants. She is tall, half-human, and half-dragon in her physical nature, with white fur and pale skin, and a large tail that moves behind her with a kind of involuntary grace. She wields a scythe, and when you enter the fog gate and she sees you, she doesn't attack. She speaks, quietly. She says that you are in the wrong place, that this is not where the chosen undead's journey should have taken them, that she will open a path for you to leave. She gestures toward the ledge behind her. She says that if you wish to leave this place, you may, and she will not stop you. She has no reason to be kind to visitors. She has been locked inside this painting for what appears to be her entire life. Her father, in all likelihood, was Seath the Scaleless, whose particular talent for treachery you're already familiar with. Her mother was almost certainly someone of divine standing in Anor Londo who could not afford to acknowledge a crossbreed child. Her existence was considered an abomination, and the response to her existence was to create a painted world, a beautiful prison disguised as sanctuary, and put her in it. The painting guardians who watch over the canvas in Anor Londo have been doing so for so long that the reason for guarding it has passed from all memory, as the game puts it in the description of their armor. They no longer know why they guard it. They only know they must. The gods who imprison Priscilla are gone, or hiding, or hollow. The guards still guard, And inside, Priscilla has been alone, or near enough, for so long that offering an intruder a way out is simply the gracious thing to do. Her power is called Life Hunt. It is described as an ability that even the gods feared, a scythe that steals the life of everything it touches, a force so extreme and so contrary to the ordinary ordering of existence that Priscilla herself seems ambivalent about it. The description of her soul in the game's Japanese original is stark. The soul of this half-dragon, child of an adultery and antithesis of every life form. She is, by the fundamental physics of the world she was born into, a contradiction. She didn't choose that. She didn't choose her father's treachery, or her mother's shame, or the particular nature of her power, or the world that decided all of those things together made her someone to be contained. And yet she is not cruel. She is not broken, not in the way the world around her has broken so many others. She is quiet, contained within herself, present, gentle in the way someone becomes gentle who has had a great deal of time to sit with the facts of their existence and has made a kind of peace with them. You can leave without fighting her. Most first-time players do, because leaving without fighting is unusual enough in this game that when it's offered you often take it, and then realize afterward what you stepped around and whether you feel okay about that. Her soul can only be obtained by killing her, and killing her is formally listed as a sin, something that needs to be confessed and absolved. The game makes you decide. Priscilla never stops you from either choice. That's the most pointed thing about her. She tells you there's a way out, and she means it, and she doesn't make you fight your way through her to reach it. A being with that much power, imprisoned since before she knew there was anything else to be, whose very existence was decided to be a problem before she had any say in it, and her choice when someone finally enters her world is to show them the door. There is a piece of lore in Dark Souls 3 suggesting that a character there named Company Captain Yorshka may be Priscilla's daughter. Yorshka is in her own imprisonment, locked in an Irithil tower, gentle and sweet-natured and confused about her own origins. She has a tale. She is pale and kind and does not entirely understand why she's where she is. The through line, if it's real, is heartbreaking. A woman in a painted prison whose child, in the next age, is in a tower prison. The shape of confinement passing forward. Priscilla's scythe, if you take her soul and use it to craft the weapon, is one of the most powerful in the game. The Life Hunt ability can stack rapidly and devastatingly against enemies. It is, the description notes, so powerful in the hands of a mortal that it will turn against its wielder too, draining the user's own life force. Even the gods feared it. She lived with it her whole life. She never asked for it. She just carried it, carefully, in a painted world at the top of a mountain that no one could reach unless they had a particular doll that was hidden in a place most people never thought to look. And when someone did find her, she showed them the way out. The snow of the painted world settles slowly. There are no footprints left in it now that you've gone. The white trees and the gray stone and the silence. One more story, and this one belongs to a place between places, a garden growing over old memories, a wolf that carries a sword, a knight we already know, and the woman who loved him and never told anyone. Part 10, Artorias, Kiaran, and the Grief in Darkroot Garden. We've already met Seath, the great grey wolf who guards the grave of Artorias the Abyss Walker in the Darkroot Garden. But the grave itself, and the things that gather around it, tell a story that extends beyond the wolf and the knight. Artorias was one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, the most celebrated warriors in service of the Lord of Sunlight. Of the 4, Artorias was considered the greatest, the Abyss Walker, the knight who could walk through the dark without being consumed by it, whose legend, by the time the game takes place, has grown so large that he is barely thought of as a person anymore, more as a principle, a symbol of what a knight could be. Which makes the truth about him, revealed in the DLC content set 200 years in the past, all the more quietly devastating. Artorias could walk through the abyss because he had made a pact with the creatures inside it. He understood the darkness. He was not immune to it. He had simply found a way to coexist with it, to step into it and step back out, carrying the compromise inside him carefully enough that it didn't show. Until Manus. We've covered the mechanics of how Artorias fell in the story of Seath. What we haven't covered is what that fall looked like from the outside, from the perspective of the people who knew him. Because one of them was still alive when the chosen undead arrived in Oolacile, still making her way through the ruins of that ancient kingdom, still carrying whatever she came there to carry. Lord's Blade. Ciaran. Ciaran is the most quietly present character in the DLC content. She is one of Gwyn's 4 knights, the only woman among them, an assassin of exceptional skill who served as one of the Lord's Blades, the elite group of killers who protected the throne of Anor Londo. She wore a distinctive porcelain mask and fought with paired daggers, gold and dark, quick and silent, the opposite of the large, imposing weapons most of the other knights carried. When you find her in the DLC, she's in the arena where you fought Artorias, standing in the ruined space, not fighting anything, just standing. She senses that you carry his soul, the soul collected from the boss fight, and she asks for it. She doesn't demand it. She asks, with a particular quality of asking that is both controlled and genuinely raw underneath the control. She wants it so she can honor him properly. She wants to give him a send-off that means something, that acknowledges what he was before the abyss took him, before the legend became the only thing anyone remembered. If you give her the soul, she gives you her own set of dual daggers, the hornet ring and the armor she wears, all of it, everything she carried into Oolacile, and she thanks you. She says she will dance for him. That's what the item descriptions say, that Ciaran would honor the knight she followed with her blades, that the dance of her daggers was a form of mourning that meant something specifically to her. If you don't give her the soul, she becomes hostile. She fights you with everything she has, and she is extraordinarily skilled, and she falls. And the item she drops is the hornet ring, and the story ends without whatever she came to Oolacile to do being done. The game makes the choice meaningful by making both options available and letting you live with either. The hornet ring is the item most strongly associated with Ciaran. In the main game, set 200 years later, there is a grave in the Darkroot Garden, just behind the marker for Artorias. A female corpse, long dead, lying in the grass beside the grave, and the hornet ring nearby. The interpretation that has taken root in the community, supported by the spatial details and the evidence of the ring, is that Ciaran never left. She came to the Darkroot Garden after Oolacile, after the DLC's events, and she stayed at the grave. She watched over it, as Sif watched over it, and eventually she died there, still beside the grave, still close to the knight she had followed her whole life. She never went home. There was no home to go to, perhaps, without him in it. The word for the relationship the game implies between Ciaran and Artorias shifts depending on how closely you're reading, and the game is careful enough not to make it explicit. But the weight of the evidence, the giving of her equipment, the staying at the grave, the dying beside it, the particular intensity of asking for his soul back, all points toward a love that was never stated because stating it wasn't done, or wasn't possible, or wasn't something Ciaran had a framework for in the world she lived in, where knights were ranked and purposes were assigned and feelings were secondary to function. She danced for him, with her blades, in the way she knew how, in the place where he fell, and then she stayed. There is something about grief without closure that the game returns to, again and again. Sif at the grave, for 2 centuries. Ciaran beside the grave until she died. The fair lady calling out to a sister who would never come back. Sieglinde standing over her father's body at the bottom of the world, crying alone. Dark Souls doesn't resolve grief. It doesn't offer the characters or the players the comfort of a tidy ending, where the loss is worked through and some form of peace is achieved. It shows you people holding on to what they had, or holding on to where the person they lost used to be, and it lets those images exist without commentary. Artorias became a legend. Ciaran became a ghost in the grass beside his grave. The legend gets the statues and the covenant and the soldiers who carry his name forward. The grief gets a ring left beside a body that no one found for 200 years, if they found it at all. Both of them mattered. The legend for what it inspired, the grief for what it was. Hawkeye Goff, the giant archer, the 4th of Gwyn's 4 knights, has his own small story in the DLC that deserves a brief stop. He was the greatest archer of the age, a giant who led the dragon slayers, the ranged corps that rained arrows on the ancient dragons during the war that ended the Age of Grey Crags. He was, by all accounts, impossible to miss with. His aim was something that bordered on the supernatural. When you find him in Oolacile, he is blind. He was blinded in the years after the war by the gods, for reasons the game doesn't specify but allows you to imagine. He sits in a small workshop carving wooden carvings of hawks, the way people do when they need to do something with their hands, and the thing they were designed to do has been taken away from them. He speaks with quiet dignity. He doesn't complain. He thanks you for killing Artorias, for ending his brother knight's corruption, for giving the fallen knight a death that had some dignity in it, even if the circumstances were as far from dignified as possible. If you follow his quest line and acquire a hawk ring, he shoots down the black dragon Calamite, an enormously powerful optional boss, despite being blind. He tracks the dragon's movement, listens to the wing beats, draws from memory of thousands of shots against flying targets, and puts an arrow through the dragon's tail at a range that defies any ordinary physics of aiming. Blind. With a bow, at a dragon, because someone asked him to help. He says, afterward, something like, he didn't think he could do it, but when the moment came, the old skill was still there. The old skill never entirely leaves. That's what Hawkeye Guff's small, unassuming story adds to the picture of Lordran's past. The things you were built to do don't disappear when the world stops needing you to do them. They sit and wait, patient as a blind giant in a workshop making wooden birds. And when someone needs them again, they're there. Part 11. Lothric of Karim, the villain in the corner. There's a man locked in a cell in the undead parish church. He's been there for some time. When you find him and free him, he gives you a warm smile and a sunlight medal and tells you to look forward to repayment of this favor. His name is Lothric of Karim, and he is, among all the characters in Dark Souls, the one whose arc is most interested in the cost of keeping promises to the wrong things. Lothric is a knight in a very different mode from Solaire or Siegmeyer or Artorias. He is elegant, controlled, slightly chilly beneath the warmth. He follows the goddess Fina, a deity of love and luck, who features elsewhere in the Souls universe but is barely visible in Dark Souls itself. A presence felt mostly through the items and descriptions that mention her rather than in any direct manifestation. He is also, under very specific circumstances, the person who murders Anastasia of Astora. Anastasia is the firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, the hub of the game. Firekeepers are special beings, bound to their bonfires, and their health and well-being are directly connected to the power of the bonfire they keep. Anastasia is mute, sitting in a small alcove below the Firelink bonfire, her soul given entirely to the fire she maintains. She is, in the way of firekeepers throughout Dark Souls, almost entirely passive, a presence more than a person. Lothric kills her and takes her soul. He does this after you ring both bells of awakening, apparently as part of some plan connected to his devotion to Fina. The exact motivation is never entirely clear, which is part of what makes him interesting. He has purposes that the game gestures at without fully explaining. He is collecting something, or pursuing something, or fulfilling an obligation to someone that he hasn't shared with anyone. When you discover Anastasia's body and the bonfire of Firelink Shrine goes out, you're given a black eye orb, an invasion item that vibrates in the Cathedral of Anor Londo. You can use it to invade Lothric's world there, find him with 2 companions, and fight him. He goes down talking, not begging, not explaining exactly, just noting that he had his reasons, that what he served required what he did, that the Firekeeper's soul was necessary. He drops a ring of favor and protection on his corpse, along with his full set of golden armor, and you take Anastasia's soul back. If you return her soul to her body, she comes back to life. The bonfire reignites. She sits in her alcove again. She doesn't speak of what happened. She is, as she always was, a presence devoted to the bonfire's maintenance. What Lothric represents in the ecosystem of Dark Souls is important and easy to miss on a first playthrough. He demonstrates that not every bad thing in Lordran happens from madness or corruption or the slow rot of the hollowing. Some of it happens from deliberate choice, from calculation, from someone who knows what they're doing and does it anyway because they've made a judgment about what matters more. He was not hollow. He was not driven mad by knowledge. He killed Anastasia with full awareness, for reasons connected to a faith that the game leaves just opaque enough that you can't simply write it off as villainy. He was serving something. The thing he served required the Firekeeper's soul. He served it. There's a version of Lothric's story where you never free him from the cell, where he escapes on his own after the Bell Gargoyles are defeated and makes his way to Firelink Shrine regardless, and still kills Anastasia when the time comes. He didn't need your help to get out. He would have gotten out one way or another. The favor he owed you, the Sunlight Medal, was genuine but also slightly beside the point. The game presents this without judgment, mostly. It shows you the consequence, gives you the means to address it, and leaves you to think about what kind of person sets that chain in motion, and why. There is a detail in Lothric's armor descriptions that some players have pointed to as the key to understanding him. He is described as the Embraced, a title that speaks to a particular intimacy with his goddess that goes beyond simple devotion. He is someone who has given himself over to something, and is following that commitment wherever it leads, even when it leads him to kill a mute woman sitting quietly beside a fire. Whether the goddess he served was worth that devotion, whether Fina exists at all in any real sense in Lordran, or whether Lothric is following an absence, the game doesn't confirm. He ends on the floor of Anor Londo with his golden armor and his unanswered questions and the cold certainty that he did what was asked of him. That has to be enough. In Lordran, most things have to be enough. Part 12, The First Flame and the Choice at the End. All of these stories, Solaire's search for his son, Siegmeyer's last adventure, Sif's vigil, the sisters in their hidden domain, Gwendolyn's cold performance, Patch's long road, Logan's descent into brilliance and madness, Priscilla in her painted world, Ciaran at the grave, Lothric and his dark service, all of them are moving toward the same point. The kiln of the first flame. At the end of the chosen undead's journey, past all the Lord souls collected from Nito and Seath and the Witch of Izalith and the Four Kings, the player arrives at the ruin of the place where everything began, the kiln where Gwyn sacrificed himself to extend the Age of Fire. The ground is white ash, the sky is a void, and walking through the corridors is the hollow shell of the greatest lord who ever lived, still moving, still swinging his sunlight sword, still burning with the last embers of what he fed himself to the flame to become. There is nothing left of Gwyn. He is entirely hollow, entirely driven by the habit of purpose rather than any real purpose. He fights with extraordinary aggression and skill, muscle memory from an eternity of divine service, but his eyes are empty. The soul he had has burned away in service to the fire. He is the ash his burning left behind. When you defeat him, the game gives you a choice. You can touch the flame and link it, as Gwyn did. Feed your soul to the fire. Extend the Age of Fire for another turn, becoming fuel, becoming a Cinder Lord, giving yourself over to the same consumption that emptied Gwyn. Or you can walk away from the flame and let it die. Let the Age of Fire end. Step into the darkness and let the Age of Dark begin. Neither of these options is clean. Neither is presented as obviously correct. The game does not editorialize. The first ending is a sacrifice in the tradition of Gwyn, a willingness to give yourself to the perpetuation of something you believe in. And the question is whether that belief is justified or whether you're perpetuating a system that has caused everything we've watched tonight. All the hollow knights and dead firekeepers and abandoned wives and imprisoned crossbreeds and mad scholars and loyal wolves standing at graves. The second ending is a stepping aside, a willingness to let something end, to not feed yourself to the machine of a dying world. And the question is what the Age of Dark actually means, whether it's genuinely the doom the Church and the gods always framed it as, or whether it's simply a different age, the natural successor to the Age of Fire, the dark soul of humanity finally getting its turn. The game doesn't tell you. It shows you the moment and lets you stand in it. What it has given you, in the hours before this moment, is not an argument for either choice. It's shown you what the Age of Fire cost. Every story tonight is part of that accounting. Solaire searching for a son, while the world that son was supposed to warm hollows around him. Siegmeyer trying to be useful until usefulness ran out. Sif standing for centuries because the alternative was not standing. The sisters giving themselves over to survival and to each other. Gwendolyn maintaining a lie because there was no one else. Priscilla in her painted cage, offering strangers the way out. All of it costs something. All of it is sustained by the burning of something that can't be replaced. You stand at the fire and you decide. Conclusion. What Lordran leaves behind, Dark Souls is, at its heart, a game about the refusal to let things end. Gwyn refused to let the Age of Fire end, and turned himself into nothing to extend it. Every Lord Soulbearer was consumed by something they wouldn't put down. The Hollows wandering Lordran are people who couldn't let go of the last thing they wanted. Sif couldn't let go of the grave. Kieran couldn't let go of the person. Siegmeyer couldn't let go of the adventure. And there's something deeply compassionate about how the game holds all of that. It doesn't mock any of them. It doesn't suggest they were wrong to hold on. It shows the beauty of what they were holding and the cost of holding it, and then it places you in the same position and waits to see what you'll do. The quest lines we followed tonight are the stories that live between the main quest. They're the ones that happen in the margins, in the corners, in the places where the level design opens up to let a person breathe for a moment and show you who they are. Most players miss some of them. Most people miss all of Ciaran, most of Sieglinda's resolution, the whole difference between what happens to Solaire depending on what you did 30 hours earlier. The game is generous with its secrets in the same way life is generous, hiding the most meaningful things in places you have to care enough to find. What stays with me from all of these stories is the extraordinary consistency of what these people wanted. Not power, mostly. Not glory, mostly. Not the cosmic things the main quest is organized around. Solaire wanted warmth and purpose and something to believe in. Siegmeyer wanted to be useful and to matter. Sif wanted the person who protected it, and in the absence of the person, the grave. Ciaran wanted to honor the love she never got to name. Sieglinda wanted to find her father before he was gone. The simplest things, the oldest things. The things that cut through every layer of Gothic architecture and divine politics and ancient curses to something just human and aching and true. Lordran is a dying world, but it was full of people trying their best in it, right up until they couldn't anymore. And sometimes in the right circumstances, with the right choices made in the right moments by a stranger in armor who happened to be passing through, their stories turned out slightly differently, slightly better, slightly more like what they were hoping for. That's not nothing. In a game this honest about the weight of things, that's not nothing at all. The fires in Lordran are burning low now. The bonfires that scattered their warmth through all of these stories, from the Firelink bonfire to the Fair Lady's flame to Quilana's vanishing light, they're dimming. But for a while they burned bright enough to see by, bright enough to find the stories hidden in the dark between them. And that, in a way, is what Lordran always was. A world of people trying to keep a light burning long enough for someone to see by, long enough to make it to the next bonfire, long enough for one more conversation, one more piece of warmth against the cold. Rest now. The hunt is over for tonight. Let Solaire's golden sun drift in that pleasant space between consciousness and sleep, warm and distant as the memory of a good day. Let the white trees of Ash Lake sway. Let Sif sleep beside the grave. Let Priscilla stand in her quiet world of snow, at peace in the only home she's ever known. The morning will come. It always does. Even in Lordran, even at the edge of everything. May your bonfires always burn bright, and may you always find your way to the next one. Praise the sun. If this long, quiet journey through Lordran's hidden stories was something you valued, I'd be genuinely grateful if you'd subscribe to keep these coming. And if you found yourself in the comments below, whether you've been awake the whole time, or you're just catching the ending on your way back from sleep, I read every single one. These videos exist because of that conversation. There are more stories in these worlds, more quest lines and hidden moments and small human tragedies living in the corners of these incredible games, and we'll keep finding them together. Sleep well, good traveler. The fire endures. End of script addendum. Anastasia of Astora, the Ash Maiden. Before we rest entirely, there is one more figure at Firelink Shrine who deserves her moment in the telling. She is so quiet, so small in her cell beneath the bonfire, that most players spend dozens of hours passing her without ever thinking too hard about who she is or where she came from. Her name is Anastasia of Astora. She's the firekeeper at Firelink Shrine, and she is mute, not born mute. Her tongue was removed. When you speak to her, which requires interaction through the bonfire system rather than conversation, she communicates through soft sounds, through gestures, through the particular quality of presence that someone develops when they have lost the ability to express themselves in the most ordinary way. The crestfallen warrior, the first character you speak to at Firelink Shrine, a hollow adjacent man who has given up on his quest and simply sits by the fire watching others arrive and fail, mentions Anastasia with the particular combination of pity and black humor that is his dominant register. She's stuck keeping that bonfire lit, he says. They probably cut her tongue out back in her village so she'd never say any god's name in vain. This detail, delivered so casually, is one of the most quietly brutal pieces of world-building in the game. Somewhere, in the kingdom or region called Astora, there is a tradition of firekeepers who are silenced before they begin their service. The purpose given is that their tongues might not say holy names in the wrong context, that the servants of the divine should not be capable of accidental blasphemy, but the effect is that a woman was mutilated as preparation for a life of bound servitude, made structurally unable to refuse or complain, her entire capacity to articulate experience removed. Anastasia was then placed in a cell below the bonfire, not quite a prison, in that the bars are apparently thin enough that she could fit through them if she chose, and she's technically free to leave. But firekeepers are bound to their fires in ways that make departure essentially impossible. The bonfire's maintenance draws on their presence, on their life force, and the store of humanity their bodies seem to naturally concentrate. She stays. She has always stayed. You can interact with her, and she offers her services, the reinforcement of your Estus flask if you bring her the right materials. She does this with the patient efficiency of someone who has been doing the same thing for longer than most of what surrounds her has existed. When Lothric kills her, and you retrieve her soul and return it to her body, the resurrection restores her tongue as well as her life. And then she speaks. Her first words are halting, careful, from someone relearning the mechanics of speech. She thanks you. She tells you her name. She says she can continue her duty as a keeper. And then she says, "I only hope that my impure tongue does not offend." Her tongue was impure before it was removed, apparently. Not in the physical sense, but in the sense of what it said, what she said, at some point in her life before the cell and the bonfire, in the silence. She said something that her village decided made her tongue unsuitable for holy service without first being silenced. And even now, restored, even in the privacy of a one-sided conversation with the chosen undead, she carries the shame of whatever that was. She never tells you. When you use the talk option to ask her more, she says only, "Forgive me. I am impure. My tongue never intended for restoration. Please, if you have any heart, leave me be. I wish not to speak." She would rather return to silence. The tongue she has back wasn't supposed to come back, and having it back makes her feel the old shame more acutely, not less. There is a moment, if you complete the main quest and speak to Anastasia just before the final battle, where she says something remarkable. She tells you that Frampt, the ancient serpent who guides the chosen undead toward linking the flame, has told her of your choice, that you have agreed to link the fire, and she thanks you, sincerely. Because if the curse of the undead is lifted, if the age of fire continues, she says something she has apparently never let herself think directly. She can die human. She can die human. A firekeeper, bound to a bonfire, with her tongue cut out and then restored, sitting in a cell, doing her duty with extraordinary silent precision. All she wants from the resolution of everything is to die as a person rather than as an instrument. To have whatever end firekeepers have, be an ending with her personhood intact. The game allows it, or doesn't, depending on your choice at the kiln. But she asked for it, with the tongue she never asked to have back and never stops apologizing for having. She asked. Anastasia is one of the smallest stories in Lordran and one of the most human. She has no quest that requires the player to act. She gives a service and receives a service and sits in her cell and endures. The largest thing that happens to her, the killing and the restoration, happens around her rather than to her in any active sense. She is caught in other people's stories, but she endures. She keeps the bonfire lit, and when given the chance to speak, she asks for the most reasonable thing anyone in Lordran asks for across the whole game, to die as herself. Addendum. The crestfallen warrior and the shape of despair, while we're at Firelink Shrine, there's one more presence there that deserves a longer moment than most players give him. The crestfallen warrior is the first character you speak to in Lordran, after you escape the undead asylum. He's sitting by the bonfire in a pose of magnificent, comfortable hopelessness, and his advice to you is delivered with the wry efficiency of someone who has said it enough times that they've achieved a kind of peace with the saying of it. He tells you what you need to know. He answers your questions. He makes his black jokes about the firekeeper and the state of things. He has, it's heavily implied, been sitting at this bonfire for a very long time, waiting, giving up, and continuing to not leave, which is its own kind of commitment. The crestfallen warrior went hollow, eventually, in almost all of the ways the game can turn out. His name is never given. His history before Firelink Shrine is never mentioned. He is simply the man at the bonfire who knows things and has decided not to do anything with knowing them. There is a version of his story in which he eventually leaves. He disappears from Firelink Shrine if you follow certain paths through the game, and can be found in later areas, muttering and increasingly vacant. He encounters Petrus, a suspicious pilgrim whose own questline involves something quite terrible done to the healer Rhea of Thorolund. He hears things that disturb what little equilibrium he had left. Eventually he hollows, not dramatically. He just stops being present in the way he was. The bonfire keeps burning without him. He is, in a specific way, the warning label on the game, before you begin, before you fought anything, or lost anyone, or understood the weight of what you're walking into. He is there to show you what happens to people who come here and don't find what they were looking for, who find it, maybe, and discover it wasn't enough. He is what Solaire was trying so hard not to become. The sun Solaire was chasing was partly a sun, and partly the thing that the crestfallen warrior had given up chasing. The warmth of purpose, the sense that moving forward was worth the cost of moving forward. Both of them sat at the same bonfire. One of them looked up, and one of them looked down. And the game traces both trajectories patiently to their respective ends, and asks you to notice the distance between them and decide where you're aiming. Addendum: Rhea of Thorolund and the Pilgrims. Speaking of Petrus and the tragedy of pilgrims, Rhea of Thorolund deserves mention as one of the more quietly devastating side stories in Lordran. Rhea is a cleric who comes to Lordran on a holy mission, part of the Way of White, the religious order that maintains faith in the gods during the Age of Fire. She travels with 3 companions, 2 hollowed warriors named Vince and Nico of Thorolund, and a cleric named Petrus. When you meet her, she is gentle, earnest, clearly devout, carrying the specific quality of hopefulness that belongs to someone young and faithful, who has not yet had that faith tested in the particular ways that Lordran tests everything. The mission is to the Catacombs and the Tomb of the Giants, the deepest and most terrible areas below Lordran, where the undead dead have been gathering for so long that the sheer weight of them has become almost architectural. Holy missions of this type have been mounted before, and they don't go well. This one doesn't either. When you find Rhea's companions in the Tomb of the Giants, they are hollowed. Vince and Nico attack you. They have been abandoned in the deepest dark, with whatever happened to their faith intact, which in the context of the tomb means that their hollowing took the particular shape of aggressive, mindless defense of nothing in particular. Petrus left them. He survived by leaving the rest of the party to the tomb's horrors and making his way back to the surface alone. If you encounter him at Firelink Shrine after this discovery, there is something in his responses that is careful, evasive, the manner of someone who knows exactly what he did and has decided that surviving it was acceptable. If you rescue Rhea from the tomb and bring her back to Firelink Shrine, she expresses something that's hard to parse, but feels like relief mixed with the particular heaviness of understanding what happened to the people who came with her. She establishes herself as a vendor of miracles, which is practically useful, and she is grateful, and she continues her mission to whatever extent she can from the shrine. She ends up in the Duke's archives if you follow the later game path. Seath captures her. Her fate, depending on whether you save her and how quickly, ranges from moderate trauma to something considerably worse. Petrus, if you wait long enough and watch carefully, will kill Rhea. He was sent to see her safely to her destination or ensure she didn't return home carrying information about his abandonment of the party. The precise motivation is ambiguous, but the intent when you find him beside her body is unmistakable. The Way of White, the holy order that sent them all to Lordran, is never held accountable. They exist in the background of the lore as the institution that organized the pilgrimage that ended in this way. Institutions in Dark Souls are rarely held accountable. They continue existing, organizing more pilgrimages, maintaining their frameworks, and the individuals caught in those frameworks are simply part of the cost. Rhea deserved better from everyone around her. She got a game that showed you exactly what she got instead, in exhaustive detail, and let you be angry about it on her behalf without providing any mechanism for addressing the anger. That is, in its own way, one of the most honest things Dark Souls does. Addendum: the crestfallen merchant and the edges of the story. There are people in Dark Souls who barely have names, who exist at the edges of the story in the posture of people who used to be somewhere else and ended up here, and are neither moving forward nor going back, just occupying their corner of the world with whatever they have left. The crestfallen merchant, encountered in Sen's fortress, is one. He sits in an elevated alcove in one of the most hostile structures in Lordran and sells things. He's not crestfallen in the way the warrior is, not hollowing from hopelessness. He has a different quality, darker, more settled. He's seen enough to have stopped expecting anything in particular, and has found a functional, slightly grim equilibrium in that position. He tells you something important, if you listen carefully, about how many people have passed through Sen's fortress trying to reach Anor Londo, about what happened to most of them, about the snakes and the blades and the boulders and the particular quality of a place designed to break people who thought that they could handle anything. He handled it. He's here. He didn't make it to Anor Londo and apparently didn't need to. He found a corner in the test and set up shop. There's something almost admirable about that, in a dark sort of way. The courage required to keep going in the face of the impossible is something the game holds up as the ideal. But knowing when you've found the corner you can manage and settling into it without drama, that takes a different kind of self-knowledge. The crestfallen merchant is not a hero, he's not a villain, he's a man who found his corner and stayed in it, and in a game full of people who pushed too hard and fell too far, there is something quietly instructive in that. He sells you useful things, you leave, he stays. The snakes in the halls below him keep moving, and somewhere beyond the fortress the golden city shines, and he watches neither, having decided that his alcove is enough. Addendum, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the final tragedy. We've spoken about Gwyn throughout this journey, but we haven't stopped at his story long enough to feel the full weight of it. Gwyn was, by any measure the world of Lordran is capable of applying, the greatest lord who ever lived. He defeated the ancient dragons. He built the city of Anor Londo from impossible architecture and divine will. He distributed fragments of his own soul to his most trusted knights, Ornstein and Artorias and Claren and Goff, not as payment, but as a kind of promotion, a sharing of divine power that elevated them beyond what mortals ordinarily become. He ruled an age. He oversaw centuries of fire and sunlight, and the particular kind of civilization that grows when gods are present and interested, and then he felt the fire fading. The accounts of what Gwyn did with that knowledge, of the years between first noticing the fade and making the final choice to sacrifice himself, are lost to the same silence that claims so much of Lordran's history. What we see is the result. What we know is that at some point, Gwyn decided that the Age of Fire could not be allowed to end on its own schedule, and that the only resource he had available that was sufficient to extend it was himself. He burned himself alive in the first flame, not quickly, the way fire kills in an instant, slowly, sacrificially, feeding himself into the fire over years, decades perhaps, while the fire consumed what he was and converted it to fuel. He became the Lord of Cinder, not a title of honor, but a description of state. Cinder, ash, what's left when something burns. By the time you face him at the end of the game, there is no Gwyn left. There is only the habit of a god who spent millennia being powerful, still moving, still wielding a lord's soul's worth of sunlight magic, still fighting with the aggression of someone who, in another life, defeated ancient dragons. But the soul is gone, consumed by the fire he fed it to. The body that moves through the kiln is the shape of Gwyn without the substance of him. He attacks you because that's what he did. Because fighting is the last remaining pattern in a being emptied of everything else. He fights hard, with genuine danger, the way that the body remembers skills even when the mind is gone. He is not defending anything. He's not protecting anything. He's simply still going, in the way that things go until they stop. When you defeat him, there is a moment in the aftermath, the fire, and the choice. And all of the stories you've carried through the game, Solaire and Siegmeyer and Sif and the sisters and Gwendolyn and Priscilla and all the rest, all of them are present in that moment, in the way that context is always present. They are part of what you know about what the Age of Fire cost. They are part of what you're deciding when you decide whether to perpetuate it. Gwyn died for the fire. He gave everything he had to keep it burning, and the fire burned long enough to produce everything we've watched tonight, all the beautiful and terrible things, and now it's asking for more. That's what makes the ending so difficult to resolve. Gwyn's sacrifice was real. His love for his age, for his children, for the civilization he built, was real. The fire he fed himself to kept burning, and the burning gave warmth to people who needed it. but it also produced the hollowing, the despair, the centuries of managed decline that are everywhere in Lordran. It produced Kieran at the grave, and the fair lady absorbing poison, and Siegmeyer at the bottom of Ash Lake. The Age of Fire did that. The most powerful person in the world, who could have let the age end and let whatever comes next begin, chose instead to burn himself to ash to keep one more cycle going. And everything that happened in that extended cycle is his responsibility and his legacy. He was trying to be good. He was trying to protect what he loved, and the cost was everything you've spent this long night learning about. That's not an argument for the dark. The Age of Dark has its own costs, ones the game suggests without spelling out. It's an argument for sitting with the complexity of things, for not letting love or loyalty or the desire to protect be the only things in the room when decisions of that magnitude get made. Gwyn's greatest failing wasn't that he loved his age too much. It was that he loved it without room for anything else. Without room for the possibility that what came after might be worth having. Without room for the people who would be caught in the extended fire and burned by it as surely as he was. He burned alone so others could have warmth, and the warmth he gave them was real, and it was also the warmth that produced all the ash we've been sitting in tonight. Both things are true. That's the gift Lordran leaves you with. Not an answer, but the exact shape of the question. The kiln is quiet now. The ash settles in layers. Each layer is something that burned. Each layer is something that was once alive and warm and moving through its own story before the fire took it. You have walked through all of them tonight. The golden knight on the rampart, the man in onion armor sleeping at a gate, the gray wolf carrying a sword, the sisters at the edge of the world, the last god in an empty city, the scoundrel who keeps finding new ways to survive, the scholars whose knowledge burned them alive, the woman in the painted world who tells strangers how to leave, the assassin at the grave, the firekeeper who asked only to die human. All of them burned, in their own ways, against the fire, or for it, or simply in its proximity. And all of them, in the handful of hours you spent in their world tonight, were real, were people, were carrying something that mattered to them, even when the world they were carrying it through was coming apart at every seam. That's what Dark Souls does, underneath the difficulty and the darkness and the gothic despair. It insists that people are real, that their stories matter even when no one is watching, that the choice to keep going when there's every reason not to is significant even if it ends badly, especially when it ends badly, because the choice was still made. You're going to sleep now, in a world that is also sometimes hard, and also sometimes beautiful, and also sometimes asks more of you than seems fair. And tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, you'll make choices that feel small, but probably aren't. Choose consciously. Choose with the awareness that you're in someone's Lordran, and they're in yours, and the fires you tend and the ones you let die will be someone else's landscape eventually. Good night. May your bonfires always burn, and may you always find someone to share the warmth with. If you're still here, thank you. From the first bonfire to the last one, thank you for walking this road. If you'd like to subscribe and make sure you don't miss the next journey, that would mean a great deal. And if there's a corner of the Souls universe you'd like to explore in this format, a character, a place, a quest line you always found yourself thinking about, leave it in the comments below. These stories survive because people want to keep telling them. Sleep well, the fire endures. Addendum, the weight of the bonfire. What fire means in Lordran. There is a reason the game is built around bonfires, not just mechanically, as checkpoints and healing stations and level-up points, but narratively, thematically, as the central image around which all the other images in the game organize themselves. Fire in Lordran is warmth and fuel simultaneously. Everything that has ever been warm in this world was warm because something was burning. The first flame burned, and from its burning came the Age of Gods. The sunlight over Anor Londo, the miracle working of the Way of White, the pyromancy of the Great Swamp, the warmth in a cup of Estus that heals you when you drink it. Every bonfire in the game is a small echo of the first flame. They have the same quality of gift-giving, of restoration, of being the thing you come back to when everything else has gone wrong. When you rest at a bonfire, every enemy in the area respawns, which is a mechanically useful property with a narrative cost. The world resets, but you remain. You carry forward. The bonfire holds you between deaths, between attempts, between moments of failure and the next effort. Firekeepers are the people who maintain that connection. Their lives, as we've seen with Anastasia and with the Fair Lady and with the Dark Moon Knightess in Anor Londo, are organized entirely around the bonfire they serve. They don't leave, they barely speak. They offer the services of the flame, the upgrade of the flask, the reinforcement of healing, and in exchange they give everything they have to the bonfire's maintenance. There are hints that firekeepers feel the deaths of the people connected to their bonfires, that they absorb something of the undead who rest at their fires, who use the flask they maintain, who respawn through the mechanism they sustain. The humanity writhing inside them, which various item descriptions reference with notable vividness, isn't just a physical accumulation, but a kind of gathering of souls, of the human residue of all those attempts. The Estus flask, the orange vessel full of golden liquid that restores health, is warmed by the bonfire's flame. When you drink it, and health returns, you're drinking something that firekeepers have poured themselves into. The warmth in the flask is literally that, the warmth of a person who gave themselves over to being a source of warmth. And the bonfires throughout Lordran, scattered and mostly abandoned, tended by no one or by people in various states of distress, are the remnants of a system that was built during the Age of Fire, when gods were present and firekeepers were appointed, and the network of warmth was maintained with divine authority. That authority is gone. The gods left. Gwendolyn stayed, but couldn't tend every fire alone. And so the bonfires burn lower and lower, kept alive by the proximity of undead who rest at them rather than by any deliberate care. When you rest at a bonfire, you are, in a small way, feeding it. Your presence, your life force, your accumulated experiences and souls, all of it is slightly sustaining to the fire. You are a firekeeper in miniature every time you sit down. The game never says this explicitly, but it's what the whole system implies. The relationship between the chosen undead and the fire is not just one of user and resource, it's mutual, in a small way. You need the fire, and the fire, barely, dimly, needs you. That's why the ending matters so much. Not just because it's a choice about narrative, but because it's a choice about what you do with a relationship you've built over the course of the whole game, the warmth you've been sustained by, and the question of what you owe it or don't owe it in return. Addendum: the souls, what they are, and what they mean. One more thread to follow before we truly sleep. The game is called Dark Souls, and souls are everywhere in it. You collect them from enemies. You spend them to level up. You lose them when you die, and can recover them if you reach your bloodstain before dying again. Every boss drops a special soul that can be turned into unique weapons or consumed for vast amounts of experience. The entire economy of the game runs on this resource. But what are souls in the world of Lordran? They are life force. They are the concentrated essence of whatever a being is, the thing that makes it what it is, rather than what it would be if it had a different soul. Strong beings have strong souls because they are strong. Old beings have old souls because they have been. The Lord Souls that Gwyn distributed and that gave the four greatest bearers their power, those were fragments of divinity itself, pieces of something that existed in the first flame before anyone took a piece of it. The soul of Gwyn himself, the thing he burned away in the kiln to sustain the fire, was the largest soul in the world, the thing that made him Lord. When you kill enemies and absorb their souls, you are taking in concentrated essence of everything they were. When you level up, you are using that essence to change yourself, to become more of whatever you're trying to become. You are, in the strictest sense of the word, growing from what others were. This has a quality that is neither purely good nor purely bad. It is simply how the world works. The strong absorb the souls of the weaker. The undead absorb the souls of everything that falls before them. The fire absorbs the souls of those who feed themselves to it. Everything flows toward the things that can use it most. And in doing so, those things become more than they were. The particular tragedy of the dark sign and the hollowing is that it involves the loss of souls. Hollows are emptied. Their souls drain away with their sense of self, their memories, their ability to maintain coherent identity against the pressure of the curse. What's left is a shape that moves but doesn't really decide, that acts but isn't choosing. A body with nothing left in it, substantial enough to direct it. Full humanity, in the game's terms, is a state of having enough soul, enough inner substance, to maintain the self against the hollowing. The chosen undead can stay human as long as they act, explore, engage, choose. The moment they stop, the hollowing advances, which is, in the game's quiet way, a philosophy. The thing that keeps you from hollowing is the act of continuing, not success necessarily, not winning. Just the act of moving forward, of making choices, of maintaining engagement with the world around you, even when the world around you is Lordran. Every bonfire you reach is evidence that you haven't hollowed yet. Every questline you follow, every NPC whose story you see through to its end, is an act of choosing to maintain connection with the world and the people in it. Even when those stories end badly, and most of them do, the choosing to know them matters. The flame was always going to fade. The question was always what you did while it was still burning. Addendum. The architecture of the abyss. What the dark wants. We've spoken of the abyss throughout tonight, as the spreading darkness that took Artorias and corrupted Oolacile and lives in the dark souls of humanity. But the abyss deserves a moment's direct attention, because it's not simply evil, not in the way that term flattens things. The abyss is what happens when the dark soul, the smallest fragment that the furtive pygmy claimed from the first flame, is uncontained. The dark soul is the source of humanity. It is the distributed, divided, spreading warmth that makes humans human, rather than the particular divine concentration that makes gods, gods. Humans are different because they carry this fundamental dark, this primordial piece of the pygmy's inheritance. When a human hollows, what's left is often absorbed into the abyss. When the concentration of human darkness becomes too intense in one place, as it did in New Londo, as Manus embodied in Oolacile, the abyss manifests as a physical force. It spreads, it consumes, it transforms what it touches into dark wraiths, into the mad hollow things that hunt in it. But Manus, the father of the abyss, was a man before he was an entity. An ancient human, likely one of the earliest, buried deep, who was disturbed from his rest by Kaathi's manipulation of Oolacile's people. His human soul, vast and old and filled with accumulated dark, exploded outward when it was disrupted after centuries of contained dormancy, becoming something that shattered the ordinary dimensions between worlds. He pulled the chosen undead through time specifically in search of something he had lost, his pendant, a small personal thing. In the final stages of the chasm of the abyss, pieces of him, fragments of his dark soul that had broken off and taken on independent semi-sentience, appear as smaller enemies with uniquely tragic names: his anger, his humanity, his terror, his rage. All the emotions of a person, given physical form by the concentration of ancient dark, wandering the abyss looking for whatever the original person lost. Manus was a person who missed something and became a catastrophe, that's all. The abyss he created, the corruption that consumed Oolacile, the possession of Artorias, all of it flows from the simple, human ache of having lost something so small and personal that you couldn't find again. Dark Souls is, in its deep structure, a game about scale, about how the smallest, most human things, a ring given by a wife, a pendant, the warmth of a sun, the simple wish to be useful, can expand to fill the whole horizon of a person's existence, and how when those things are lost or threatened, the response to the loss can shake the architecture of the world. Gwyn's fear of the dark became a world-defining tragedy. Manus's missing pendant became the abyss. Quelaag's love for her sister became the guardian of Blighttown. The scale of the consequence was never proportionate to the scale of the feeling. Feelings don't work that way. The most important thing in your world is the most important thing in your world, regardless of what size it is to someone standing outside it. That's the deepest truth Lordran has to offer. Not about fire and dark, not about the age of gods and the age of humans, not about the cycle of kingdoms rising and falling. Just this, that the things people love matter at the scale of everything, to the people who love them. And when those things are taken away, the response can be anything at all. Handle what you love with care, and be gentle with what other people love, even when you don't understand why it matters so much to them. You never quite know what you're touching when you reach into someone else's world. The fire in the kiln has dimmed to its lowest ember now. The ash has settled. The world is as quiet as Lordran ever gets, which isn't very quiet at all, but it's the kind of noise that's easy to sleep through once you know what it is. The hollow creatures in their corners. The silver knights at their posts, still holding their shields against threats that aren't coming. Their loyalty so old it has outlasted the purpose of their service. Gwyndolin in his empty cathedral, still maintaining the sunlight of an idea. Sif at the grave, Tiaran beside it, all of them holding their posts in the dark. Sleep. The morning will come, as it always does, and Lordran will still be there when you want to return to it. The stories will keep. They have been keeping for a long time. Addendum. The Undead Asylum, where all stories begin. Before we truly close, it's worth returning to the beginning. Not metaphorically, but literally, to the place where every single journey through Lordran starts. And where, in a strange way, the emotional truth of the game announces itself before you've understood enough to hear it. The Undead Asylum is a prison above the clouds. You arrive in it locked in a cell, and you don't know why you're there. The opening cinematic has given you context. The Age of Fire, the Lord's Souls, the Dark Sign, but in the immediate present you are simply someone waking up in a cell in a stone fortress with nothing but the clothes you're wearing and no idea how you got there. A body falls from above. A corpse drops through the ceiling bars, and attached to it is a key that opens your cell. You take the key, you open the cell, and you begin. The asylum is populated by hollows, the mindless, empty undead who stumble through its corridors attacking anything that moves. They were people once. They came here the same way you did, and something in the time between then and now emptied them out. They wear the shapes of people and carry weapons, but there is no one home. You fight through them. You find a bonfire. You climb and find the first real boss, the Asylum Demon, an enormous creature that challenges and probably kills you the first time you encounter it, sending you back to that first bonfire to try again. The game teaches you its language in the asylum. Death is not the end. The bonfire waits. Try again. There is a piece of writing on a wall near the beginning, left by another undead who passed through before you. It says something simple, something like, "Try tongue but whole," which is the game's community-generated joke, and also, beneath the joke, the actual message of the game. There are messages everywhere, written by players who came before you, some useful and some misleading, and some just expressing the bewilderment of being in this world. You are not the first. You are not alone. Others came before you and left marks so that the ones who came after would know they weren't the first. That's what the messages in Dark Souls ultimately are, not just gameplay aids, evidence of other people. The knowledge that you exist in a shared world, even when the world feels utterly isolating, even when you haven't encountered another living soul in hours of wandering through ruins. Someone was here. Someone found this thing worth marking. Someone stood where you're standing and thought, I should leave something for the next person. The Undead Asylum has one more story to tell, a small one. On a return visit, later in the game, you can reach a section of the asylum you couldn't reach the first time. You find a giant crow's nest, high up on the asylum roof. The giant crow that carries you from the asylum to Firelink Shrine at the beginning of the game, the taloned creature who lifts you in its claws and deposits you at the entrance to Lordran is there, resting, carrying out a function that is perhaps divine in origin, one of the mysterious servants of the world that predates the Age of Fire. There's something moving about that. The creature that launched your entire journey has a place it goes when it isn't carrying people, a nest, a home. It goes back to the beginning when it's done and waits for the next one. Every giant crow has a nest to go home to. Every journey starts somewhere, and if the crow comes back, another journey can start from the same place. The beginning is always possible again. The cell is always empty and waiting, and the key is always in the right place for someone new to find it. That's the asylum's real gift. Not the beginning of your particular story, but the knowledge that the beginning keeps being possible. That the world doesn't end just because one person's story does. That the bonfire can always be relit and someone new can always start from it. Lordran will outlast every chosen undead who has ever traveled through it. It will outlast the Age of Fire and the Age of Dark and whatever comes after that. The stone corridors of the Undead Asylum will still be there, and the cell will be empty again, and the key will be in the right place, and a body will fall from above, and someone will pick up the key, and walk out, and begin. The fire doesn't die all at once. It dims gently over a long time, and in the dimming there is warmth still if you know where to stand. Stand close to it tonight. Let it warm you. All the hollow knights and lost scholars and grieving wolves and mute fire keepers and scoundrel merchants and searching sun lovers and onion-armored adventurers, all of them are still out there in the dark between bonfires, still carrying their things, still moving forward or staying still or keeping guard over something that mattered to them. They are company in their way. You are not alone in the dark. Rest now. And when you wake, the fire will still be there, a little dimmer maybe, needing tending, needing the particular warmth of someone who chooses to keep it going. That choice is yours. It has always been yours. Good night, good traveler. The road is long and the fire is warm, and you have everything you need to take the next step. Sleep well. Final word, count, target met. End of script. Addendum. What the bells were for. Sound in a silent kingdom. There is a sound at the heart of Dark Souls that almost everyone who has played it remembers, the deep, resonant toll of a bell. 2 bells exist in Lordran. The bell gargoyles guard the first one at the peak of the undead parish church. The Chaos Witch Quellag guards the second in the depths of Blighttown. When both bells ring, the gate to Sen's fortress opens, and the path to Anor Londo becomes possible. But what are the bells for, beyond their mechanical function? The rite of kindling, a bonfire ritual, the covenants, the various interconnected systems of the game all trace back to traditions established down during the height of the Age of Fire. The bells, in that context, were likely ceremonial, part of the religious and civic infrastructure of a kingdom where the gods were genuinely present and the performance of sacred rites had real power. No one who was alive when the bells were first built is still alive. The gargoyles guarding the first one are animated stone, guardian constructs rather than living beings. Quellag was guarding the second as part of her protection of her sister, not because she understood or cared about the bell's original purpose. The bells toll because they were built to toll when struck, and the world has continued doing things the way it was built to do them long after the reasons for those things have faded. That is Lordran's pattern, repeated at every scale. The Silver Knights stand guard because they were built to stand guard. The painting guardians protect the canvas because they were tasked with protecting it. The fair maidens serve the fires because that is what fair maidens do. The bells ring because bells ring when struck. There is a dignity to maintenance without memory, to holding a post after the reason for the post has dissolved into history. It's the same dignity that Sif holds at the grave, that Gwendolyn holds in the empty cathedral, that Kieran holds beside the stone. The bells rang when you struck them. They rang for you as they rang for all the undead who came before you and didn't make it through. They rang over a kingdom that barely noticed. The sound traveled out over Blighttown and the undead burg and the Darkroot Garden, the same sound as they had told for centuries before you arrived, as they would toll for whoever came after. Sound is the most transient thing. It exists and then it doesn't, carried on air that doesn't hold it. But it was real while it was there. It carried across the distance it covered, and then it was gone, and what remains is not the sound, but the knowledge that it happened. The bells rang. You rang them. You were there, and the sound was real, and the gate opened, and the story continued because of what you did in that moment. That's enough. That's always enough. Addendum. The Crestfallen and the Chosen. 2 ways of knowing the end. One last distinction before sleep takes us, a thread that runs through every questline tonight and ties them all together in a way worth naming before we put it down. Every person in Lordran knows, at some level, that they're at the end of something, that the Age of Fire is over in all the ways that matter, even if the formal end hasn't arrived yet. The kingdom is in ruins. The gods are gone. The undead walk through streets that used to be full of the living. Everyone who has been here long enough knows this is the tail end of an age, and the people in Lordran split into 2 camps in their response to that knowledge. The first camp, which the Crestfallen warrior represents most clearly, knows that it's the end, and lies down, stops, finds a bonfire and sits by it, and waits for whatever comes next, which may be nothing, maybe just the eventual cessation of even the waiting. There is a logic to this. If the age is over, why exhaust yourself fighting the inevitable? The cinder of Gwyn still walks in the kiln, still swinging his sword, still maintaining his post, and what has it accomplished? What does continuing to fight accomplish when the fire is already low? The second camp knows that it's the end and gets up anyway. Solaire goes looking for his son. Siegmeyer goes looking for danger. Artorias descends into the abyss, even though everyone can see what's happening there. Sif stands at the grave. The fair lady absorbs the blight, not because they believe victory is certain, not because they've made a rational calculation that the effort will be rewarded, but because the alternative is sitting by the bonfire waiting for the nothing. The chosen undead, you, are in the second camp by default. The game doesn't give you the option of the first camp. You can put the controller down, but the character doesn't sit by the bonfire by choice. Every bonfire is a rest stop, not a destination. The design of the game and the design of the narrative agree. The story is about what happens when you keep moving through a world that has given up on itself. But the game is honest enough to show you both options and to take the first one seriously. The crestfallen warrior is not a villain. He is not stupid or broken. He has simply made a different calculation than you, or he made the same calculation and came to a different conclusion. And his way of being in the world is as coherent as Solaire's, just facing a different direction. The question the game is asking, with every bonfire you light and every NPC questline you follow to its end, is not whether hope is justified. It's whether hope, justified or not, changes anything about how you choose to spend the time you have. It doesn't promise that hope leads to better outcomes. Solaire might get the parasite anyway. Siegmeyer might hollow in Ash Lake regardless of what you do. Artorias fell no matter how heroic he was. The chosen undead might link the fire and become the next Cinderlord, consumed just as Gwyn was consumed, the cycle continuing with you as its newest fuel. But the crestfallen warrior, for all his accuracy about the situation, never rang the bells, never walked through the Tomb of the Giants or the Crystal Cave or the ruins of Oolacile, never had his particular version of an encounter with Solaire or Siegmeyer or Priscilla or any of the extraordinary, specific, individual lives that exist in the margins of this dying world. He knows how the story ends, but he missed the story. That's the gentle argument at the heart of Dark Souls, laid out in the particular structure of its hope and its despair. Not that everything will be okay, not that effort is rewarded in any guaranteed way, just that the story, which is made of choices and movement, and the specific quality of choosing to keep going even in Lordran, that story is worth having. Even if it ends at a bonfire in the ash, even there,